Time to begin our meeting. On behalf of the International Peace Institute, I'm pleased to welcome you to this half-day policy forum on settling international disputes, lessons from the past, challenges for the future. We're extremely pleased to co-host this meeting with the permanent mission of Finland and the permanent mission of the Republic of Indonesia to the United Nations. Many thanks for bringing this event to IPI. I would like to thank also our colleagues at the Finnish mission for a very fruitful collaboration in shaping and organizing this meeting, and in particular to thank Johanna Karanko, as well as my colleagues at the IPI, Marilyn Messer and Beatrice Agiarco for their effort. Now, these two panel events marks the 90th anniversary of the historic settlement of the Åland Islands crisis, which was successfully mediated by the League of Nations, one of the very few mediation successes of the precursor of the United Nations. There are many interesting aspects in this settlement worth of our attention: the enduring but evolving autonomy, whose guarantees have been reviewed throughout the years, and the most recent version of which entered in force in 1993, the demilitarization aspect, the protection of cultural rights. But I will leave to our illustrious speakers to highlight them. However, I want to mention one aspect in particular, which I believe can be useful for current autonomy disputes. The Åland Islands provide one example of internationally guaranteed political status for a territory that is otherwise subject to the sovereignty of a state, in this case Finland. And not all may remember that both Finland and the Åland Islands had to vote in a referendum to approve the accession of Finland to the European Union in 1995. But only after Finland had successfully negotiated exemption for the islands to avoid violating the terms of the autonomy agreement. After presenting the Åland case, the first panel will also draw lessons from the more recent peace process that led to the special autonomy of Aceh in Indonesia. And in the second panel, we will instead look at ongoing dispute in two different regions, Abyei and Kurdistan of Iraq. We're fortunate to have very knowledgeable experts on each of these cases, as well as the chief of the UN mediation support. In the second panel, in fact, we would like to examine what role the United Nations has to play in mediating and support these and other similar disputes, including the tools at its disposal and the increasing relevance of partnership with regional and sub-regional players. With no intention to draw any template approach or cookie-cutter solutions, we hope that all this discussion will provide food for thoughts to all of you who are observing or are involved in the solution of these disputes. I just want to remind you that this event is going to be streamed live, so when you are asking a question, if you may introduce yourself for the benefits of our audience on internet. With those few words of welcome, I'm now very pleased to introduce Ambassador Jarmo Vinnanen, Permanent Representative of Finland to the United Nations, for his welcoming remark and subsequent chairing of the first panel. Ambassador Vinnanen, welcome. The floor is yours.
Francesco, thank you very much for those kind words. And I would also wish to welcome all of you, Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, to this seminar organized by the permanent missions of Finland and Indonesia to the United Nations in a very good and close cooperation with the IPI. We appreciate very much the cooperation we have enjoyed with the IPI for several years, and certainly we try to keep up this cooperation also in the future. The organization of this seminar was inspired by the 90th anniversary last year of the League of Nations resolution on the Åland Islands dispute between Finland and Sweden, and the seminar is organized in conjunction with the exhibition, The Åland Islands Solution, a Precedent for Successful International Dispute Settlement, that was inaugurated last night, and the exhibition is going to be on display at the delegates' entrance lobby of the United Nations until the 27th of January. The Åland Islands Solution is a historic event, but still has very much relevance today. The Åland Island example has served as an inspiration for the resolution of other conflicts, such as the conflict in Aceh, that will be also showcased today. And is looked into with interest due to its durability. After the First World War, Finland was quite different from the welfare state it is today. It was a recently independent developing country that also had suffered a bitter civil war in 1918, right after the Declaration of Independence in 1917. The other state party to the dispute, Sweden, was much more stable and developed. Some Swedes even today say that they are much more developed and stable than Finland. The Åland Islands are today the wealthiest part of Finland and the 11th most prosperous region in the European Union. Of course, at the time of the dispute, it was also a poor community of fishermen and farmers, but very strategically located at the mouth of the Gulf of Bothnia. The League of Nations' probably only major achievement during its lifetime was the settlement of the Åland Islands dispute. And this settlement was successful for many reasons, but one key provision, of course, was the very big autonomy which was given to the Ålanders for their islands. And for an autonomy to work, the majority needs to understand that the minority needs to feel secure. The minority needs protections of, for example, of its identity, that is language and culture, but also in issues concerning property and extensive self-government. Finland was willing to accept these conditions and to respect them partly because it too had experience of being an autonomy as an autonomous Grand Duchy in the Russian Empire from 1908 until 1917, with rights similar to those granted to Ålanders. And also during that period, of course, Finns experienced how it felt when the ruler tried to infringe to the autonomy and what kind of consequences that had. The other issue we are going to deal this morning, the Aceh, that conflict, the resolution of which was clearly inspired by the Åland Island example, was mediated by the former President of Finland, Mr. Martti Ahtisaari, and his crisis management initiative. And of course, later on, Martti Ahtisaari became a Nobel Peace Laureate, partly because of his activities in Aceh. In Aceh too, the basis of the settlement was an enlarged autonomy. Ambassador Pucha, who will discuss the Aceh negotiations, the settlement and the situation in Aceh today, was part of the Indonesian negotiating team in this mediation. Maybe the solution in Aceh conflict can also serve as an example in solving other conflicts in the world. More and more emphasis has recently been put on preventing conflict and preventing relapse into conflict, for example, through mediation. This should definitely be our focus in order to prevent human suffering and to foster sustainable development. At the same time, we should put more effort into resolving already existing conflict, especially protracted ones, as more time passes, the more difficult the solutions seems. If we, for example, take a look on the agenda of the Security Council, it's easy to notice that many of those issues have been on the agenda of the Security Council for decades, some of them already from the beginning of the United Nations. It seems that too often we are very good in managing certain conflicts and taking care that they are not flaming into open battles, but the solutions and solving these disputes seems to be much more difficult. We should not remain content with just managing these and other ongoing conflicts. We need to encourage and foster the political will that is needed to ultimately solve these conflicts. As President Ahtisaari has said, all the conflicts of the world can be solved, and that there is no excuse for allowing to drag into perpetuity. So there's certainly a task for all of us here. Now we go smoothly to the first panel, or the panel of this morning, where we have three excellent speakers. We have Camilla Gunnel, who is the Premier of the Government of Åland. Then we have Elisa Leclerc, who is a member of Finnish Parliament from Åland. And then we have Ambassador Pucha, who is the Ambassador of Indonesia to Austria and the UN organizations there. I'll first give the floor to Camilla Gunnel, who, though of her young age and even younger looks, has a lot of experience in the politics and in the administration of Åland Island. Is serving as the head of the self-government since last year.
Yeah,
November last year, so that's quite recent position. So please, Camilla, you have the floor.
Thank you very much, and thank you for the kind presentation. First of all, I'd like to thank the IPI and the Permanent Mission of Finland for arranging this seminar and for showing interest in the Åland example. And I'd like first to give you a brief presentation about Åland. Maybe you all know everything already, but I tell you in short. The Åland Islands are located in the heart of Scandinavia and in the Baltic Sea, between Finland and Sweden. It has there are 6,700 islands and a population of 28,000. And a brief history, Mr. Ambassador was telling it very good, but Åland was a quiet place in the middle of the Swedish kingdom until 1809, when Finland became a part of the Russian Empire. The island's new rulers initiated the construction of a large fortress. During the Crimean War, French and British troops attacked the fortress, and at the peace negotiations held in Paris in 1856, the Åland was demilitarized through a one side committed from Russia. Finland became independent in 1917 after the First World War, and the Ålanders didn't want to become a part of the newborn Republic of Finland. They wanted to reunite with Sweden. Due to the international character of the question, it was referred to the newly formed League of Nations. Åland also have its own flag. It came in 1954 and is since 1917 a member of the Nordic Council. In June 1921, League of Nations presented a compromise decision which offered something to each of the three parties. Finland got the sovereignty of the Åland Islands, and Åland was guaranteed the Swedish culture, language, and local customs, and the self-government, demilitarization and neutralization. So today, Åland has a parliament. This is the parliament elected in October last year, with 30 members from 6 different parties. And this is the government. Quite small, but effective, I think. So I'm the head of the government, and here are the ministers of finance, trade and industry, internal, external affairs, social and healthcare, infrastructure and culture, and education. And Åland has a broad and exclusive legislative competence. Finland cannot pass on laws on these fields. We pass laws in the Åland Parliament on education and culture, health and hospital, social care, environmental issues, trade and industry, local transport, municipal administration, police, post service, radio and television. So the legislative competence is divided on these two parliaments, Åland and Finland, on equal footing. And the Finnish parliament, they passes laws which apply also in Åland in these areas: foreign affairs, taxation, civil and criminal law, court system, customs, coast guard, and the church. In the Finnish parliament, Åland had one member, and she is also here today, Mrs. Elisabeth Nauclair, coming from Sweden, representing Åland in the Finnish parliament. That's quite fantastic, I think. And also in Finland has a governor at Åland. And these two people are both very important mediators between the parties when questions has to be solved. The Åland economy, what we are living on, is mostly shipping. Since Åland is outside the tax union in the EU, it made it possible for us to keep the tax-free sales on the cruising ships, and this has been very important for the economy. We have quite a big public administration, and there are also tourism, farming, banking, real estate, and so on. A well-functioning Nordic welfare society, I would say. So, the Åland example is often sometimes presented as a model or a package solution in the endeavor to resolve territorial or ethno-political conflicts elsewhere. Åland, however, should not be understood as a one-size-fits-all solution, but as an example. And there are three components, as I like to discuss with you today, of the example that is very important: the demilitarization, neutralization, the territorial autonomy, and the cultural and linguistic safeguards. All three components have evolved over time, and so Åland is an example of a regime shaped by both continuity and change. The nature of the arrangement made to accommodate the needs of the Ålanders is dynamic and has empowered Åland to adapt and become a modern autonomy. In my view, this is an important lesson learned. An autonomy, even as a permanent solution with international guarantees, does not have to be static. Åland's demilitarized status has been confirmed and complemented with neutralization in connection with the solution of the Åland question by the League of Nations. Military security is central for many autonomy arrangements, and permanent demilitarization may offer a viable alternative. On the side of the Ålanders, there is a desire to play an active role in the maintenance of the demilitarization and neutralization of the Baltic Sea. Territorial autonomy is probably the most well-known component of the Åland example, and international delegation of politicians, researchers, NGOs visit frequently the Åland Islands to study the concrete institutional design of the autonomy. While many are familiar with the historic settlement of the territorial dispute between Sweden and Finland, few have followed the development of the autonomy over time. After the Finnish parliament had adopted the first act on the autonomy for Åland in 1920, the League of Nations enhanced the arrangement and proposed 6 additional guarantees that became part of the settlement of the Åland question. At the time, all 3 issues were considered central to the welfare of the Ålanders and the possibility to protect their distinct minority identity. The right to domicile, a kind of regional citizenship, has since developed as a concept regulating both the right to vote and stand for elections and to acquire real estate. Åland should not be understood as an isolated system. Efficient cooperation between the autonomy and the state necessitate well-functioning cooperation structures. And then we have the cultural and linguistic safeguard. Bilingualism has a long tradition in Finland, Since independence in 1917, the Constitution guarantees the use of both Finnish and Swedish before courts and in contacts with other authorities. The official language of the provincial, municipal, as well as the state authorities on Åland is Swedish, and relations between authorities on Åland and state authorities are largely to be conducted in Swedish, which has proven to be a challenge on the state side of the state. In fact, that is viewed with concern on Åland. The linguistic and cultural safeguards have evolved considerably during the past 90 years, not least in order to reflect international human rights. Åland institutions have often been described in a rather static manner. As mentioned earlier, these institutions have developed considerably over time and function in many ways differently today than at the time of their conception. The Act of Autonomy has been subjected to three major revisions after its original form of the early 1920s. It was reviewed in 1951, in 1991, and again in 2005 and in 2009, as a consequence of Finland's membership in the European Union. This means that new generation of politicians, as myself, have been able to put their stamp on the development of the regime and to reinvigorate the commitment to the original agreement. The Åland Parliament had to give its consent with regard to the entry into force of EU treaties on Åland, and in the particularity of the islands was confirmed by the EU in the so-called Åland Protocol. In this regard, the good contacts developed between Finland and Sweden within the Nordic and European integration process have been very important. The very idea of an autonomy gives perhaps the impression that Åland is somehow isolated from the rest of the world. For instance, some people believe wrongly that it is nearly impossible to move to Åland or to obtain the right of domicile. However, I would like to underline that today a third of the inhabitants of Åland are born outside Åland, mainly in Finland, but the increase of the population in the recent decades originates primarily from countries outside the Nordic region, and many different languages are used in the Åland homes today. The Nordic countries incorporate 4 different autonomous examples: the autonomy of Åland, the Faroe Island and Greenland belonging to Denmark, and then there's the Sami area. The Åland example is therefore to be understood in the Nordic context, in which autonomy is experienced as an acceptable solution. Autonomies are also members of the Nordic Council and the Nordic Council of Ministers. Furthermore, the Nordic region has experience of demilitarization, not only with regard to Åland, but also for Svalbard, north of Norway. Since territories may not be moved around, autonomy is then about finding a workable balance between separation and cooperation. Any system proposed should include elements of both. I wonder if I have my last picture. Different elements of the Åland example have proven interesting for different actors at different times and for different reasons. This dispute settlement process itself, the historic arrangements, as well as the development of autonomy, demilitarization and language protection over time can be of interest. To my knowledge, diplomats, politicians and civil society representatives have used Åland as an example, among others, in effort to solve ethno-political conflicts in Crimea, East Timor, former Yugoslavia, Israel-Palestine, Kashmir, Kurdistan, Nagorno-Karabakh, and so on. For them, the Åland example has solved many purposes. The Åland example can be of concrete value as an example of institutionalized solutions. It can be of abstract and conceptual value as a point of reference in discussions about your own priorities and agendas, and as a physical meeting place, a space for low-level talks and meetings. I can only encourage you all to come to the Åland Islands and experience the system. This year it is 90 years since the first Autonomy Act was passed. I hope that we in 10 years' time, when the autonomy celebrates 100 years, will have a new act on autonomy. It is my wish that the Åland example will be used internationally even more in the future. We are willing to contribute with our knowledge about a well-functioning, sustainable autonomy. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you very much, Camilla, for your very extensive and very good presentation of the Åland Islands and the autonomy and how it can serve as an example for other places. Before I give the floor to Elizabeth Nauclair, whom I understood that will take us smoothly from Åland Islands to Aceh, so if there would be anybody, or if we could take two questions, if somebody has any questions on the autonomy or something else on Åland Island at this stage, so this would be a good opportunity to ask those questions or make comments. And please present yourself before you do that. Please, you have the floor.
Hi, Stavo from UNEP. I know this is maybe not the most interesting part of it, so I would just ask, what's the weather like in the Åland Islands?
Well, I think it's quite similar as here, but maybe it's a little bit more snow than rain. Very important question.
But in the summertime, it's wonderful. Really a paradise. Please.
Thank you very much for your presentation. I think that autonomy is a very interesting perspective to solve protracted conflicts. And both examples that we have today from Indonesia and the Åland Islands stand as interesting examples to be followed for resolving these issues. You mentioned in your presentation that you have two points of contact. You have the governor of who is appointed by the Finnish government to the Åland Islands, and you have also, of course, the member of parliament that we have here among us today, who is Swedish, which is quite a particularity and a vibrant way to celebrate this duality in the language and in the culture. My question, that can be also answered by the honorable member of parliament and the prime minister, is how do you manage daily the autonomy in case of, for example, emergence of disputes? You mentioned the role of mediator. Can you elaborate on that? Because there are, of course, some shared parts in the autonomy. So how do you manage that relation on a daily basis? Thank you.
Okay, before I give the floor to Ms. Gunnel to answer this, may I also add one issue? I mean, you mentioned about that autonomy is very much about separation and cooperation, and there has to be a proper balance on that. When we see many other places where there's a certain amount of autonomy, we always see also tendencies for separation, and that there are very often actors, political parties, or some other people who actually are very much in favor of separation. So do we see any separatist movements in Åland Islands?
Yes, we do. I showed you the picture of the parliament with 30 members, and after the election in October, there are 3 members in the parliament today that are from the independent party. So there is a party, it started maybe 10 years ago in the islands. So they have a separatist agenda for Åland. But among the people, it's not a very big issue. Most of the people are very pleased with the solution, that being a part of Finland, but with the autonomy status. And on the daily basis, how it's working, it's of course issues now and then that we don't agree on, and we have to have a dialogue with the Finnish government to discuss different issues. And in that context, the member of the parliament who is in Helsinki every day is very important to open doors and to discuss these things more easily with the representatives of the Finnish government. And also the governor on Åland is an important person. Besides these people, we also have, of course, direct dialogue between the Åland government and the Finnish government. And then we have a Åland delegation. Maybe Elizabeth can explain more details in this between that is an important institution also for working together. And with external affairs, we have a special contact group between the Foreign Ministry of Finland and Åland government for external questions. And in that group, there are often discussed how to show the Åland example more and widely over the world. Maybe Elizabeth like to say something also.
Yes, I can maybe include that in
No. Thank you very much. Elizabeth is going to include in her presentation certainly answers to this, and this takes us smoothly to Mrs. Nauclair, who, as we have heard already, was born in Sweden and trained as a lawyer, and she is the Åland Islands' first female member in the Parliament of Finland. Ms. Nauclair is now serving the second term in the Finnish Parliament, re-elected last year in 2011. Before being elected to the Parliament, she has an extensive career once again in the Åland Islands administration and be member of the Åland delegation to the Nordic Council and to the Åland Parliament. And she has also very close connection to the United Nations, has been serving as a civil affairs officer in former Yugoslavia from 1993 until 1996. And she has published several articles concerning autonomy, peacemaking and conflict resolution. And she chaired Åland Peace Institute's first research council. I have very good recollections on our meetings with Ms. Nauclair. When in my previous position, I was every now and then invited to the Foreign Affairs Committee of the Parliament of Finland to serve as an expert on certain issues. And Ms. Nauclair always had the most difficult questions to answer to. Very often they had something to do with the autonomy and the position and status of Åland Islands, and I found it very difficult to answer those questions. But you have the floor, Elizabeth, please.
Thank you very much. This is not true, because I would have remembered it if you had failed to answer my questions. But I'm glad you found them difficult, because that was probably the purpose, to get people thinking. Well, dear friends of conflict resolution, ladies and gentlemen, we just listened to this presentation by the Premier of the Åland autonomy, and it is very interesting, but why has it drawn so much attention by the international community? One of the answers is, of course, that is one of the few conflicts that has been settled by an international organization in a sustainable way. It was one of the very first conflicts where this form of autonomy arrangement was implemented, and many of the special features were created specifically for these cases. It has therefore been natural to look at the Åland autonomy and ask if it is doable anywhere else. Could it be copied as such and applied in other conflicts? Is it a model? The answer is no. All minority disputes are different, and internal conflicts, they are different. There are different needs. They have different background, different history, different possibilities, etc. But conflict-solving mechanisms, being part of our autonomy and proven successful, could be copied, or could at least inspire to our solution, to other solutions. And this is where I want to maybe answer part of this question. The Åland delegation was created in 1921 in Geneva. It's like an arbitrary body consisting of 2 members appointed by the Finnish government and 2 by the Åland parliament. The chairman is the representative of the Finnish state in the Åland Islands, and he is appointed by the president of Finland after a suggestion by the Speaker of the Åland Parliament. I used to claim that that is the only place in the world where the minority has an influence on who the majority is sending to the area as their representative. And this has been copied all over the world, the Åland delegation. I listened to a professor who you probably know, Yashgai, in New Delhi once, who talked about our Åland delegation, and that was the arbitrary body between China and Hong Kong. And this the Åland delegation has been copied many places. I'm not going into details what they are doing, but that is also a way of communicating with the state. That was beside what I was going to tell about, but that was part of the answer. During my 3.5 years with autonomic questions with the UN in former Yugoslavia during the war, I was at once, when I came down, warned by the Serbs in Croatia, don't come here and talk to us about autonomy. We are only interested in independence. What do you know of bloody conflicts, you who come from a rich and civilized Nordic country? So I always had to start my talks by saying Finland was definitely not a rich and civilized country in 1917 at its declaration of independence. The second city in Finland was looking like Vukovar. It was leveled during the bloody fighting in the civil war in Finland. The civil war in Finland was not about the Åland question, but it was in the same time, with the same people, in the same spirit that the Åland solution should be applied and the confidence built. And there are many elements in the Åland autonomy solution that is interesting for others to study, such as the Åland delegation. And one of them is the fact that the decision that should be implemented was against the will of the people. And still this form of power sharing has lasted for more than 90 years. I think one could say that the Ålanders have been fighting ever since for their rights, but never with weapons. We're on a daily basis unsatisfied and negotiating for developing the autonomy. Many factors, such as the European Union, have made this more and more difficult but necessary. The European Union only knows of independent states as members, while we are used to represent ourselves from the Nordic cooperation, where the autonomous territories are not bound by a decision within their legal competence before they have given their consent. A unique construction which makes the Nordic Council of Ministers to a precursor in international cooperation. The Åland autonomy is not a happy end solution that could be applied, but it could be and has been a source of inspiration. I would claim that the shortcomings, the mistakes, the disputes, the unsolved problems are equally important when it comes to a learning process. How do we share power? What is good governance? How do you create a system with rule of law in such a small society? These are relevant questions. Well, Aceh, as we will hear more about, had autonomy earlier when the negotiations started, an autonomy that they were not satisfied with and did not want to hear the word autonomy, while self-rule or self-governing was acceptable. The same thing I have experienced when talking to Tibetans in exile. The notion autonomy can also trigger the opposite reaction by the state, believing that the way to autonomy is leading only in one direction, down the slippery slope right to independence, and therefore not acceptable. Lesson number one for a mediator is to overcome this reaction from both sides. All minorities and majorities, regions, small peoples, conflicting parties tend to exaggerate the importance of symbols. One has to over and over explain that it is the content that matters, the substance, and not the words. In Yugoslavia, there were 3 constituent peoples, and then suddenly, for example, the Serbs in Croatia were a minority. No one wanted to be a minority in the Balkans. The Åland solution was, by the League of Nations, labeled as a minority solution. Otherwise, some of the strong protections that we heard about, the safeguards, would not have been acceptable. And you can even today hear people say that the Ålanders have privileges, while it is in fact a form for compensation for not getting their will through to be part of Sweden. It's never a privilege to be a minority. A privilege is to belong to the majority in the country. We have accepted to have autonomy and be a minority, and we have only benefited from it. In this context, it's important to study the kin state. The reaction of the kin state is, of course, crucial. I would claim that Sweden is a model in this respect. A kin state which accepted the decision by the League of Nations, but continued to support the minority in question in areas where the cultural and linguistic factors are important, such as media, education, medical ward, but never ever getting involved in the internal politics or supporting any separatist movement. In the case of Aceh, autonomies from around the world were studied, and naturally the Åland Islands. Others were the Basque Country, Mindanao, and the autonomous regions in Nicaragua. The previous law on autonomy for Aceh was a law on the administration of Aceh, but without enough regulating the different bodies involved and the structure of it, and we will hear more about this. This is probably one of the most interesting and important parts of the Åland autonomy, and as I said, the Åland delegation is one of these power-sharing mechanisms that are so well thought through and defined. A strict control system combined with the international guarantees was put in place in the case of Åland, a system created for 2 parties that had no trust in each other, as made for war areas. We in Åland today claim that it is after 9 years of autonomy time for a less strict system built on trust, but that is another issue. The Act of Autonomy can only be altered through a decision by the Finnish Parliament and the Parliament in Åland. It is as a bilateral agreement. Therefore, it still serves its purpose despite the fact that the international guarantees have disappeared. And this is very much thanks to the role of the president in the system. The question of army, security, and policing is often one of the core issues in such discussions, as was in the case of Aceh, with the existence of a guerrilla movement present. Åland is one of the few autonomous territories in the world having its own police force. The Åland police is cooperating with the Finnish police and also carrying out tasks on their behalf through a special legal arrangement. This, I'm sure, was studied in the case of Aceh. Thorvald Stoltenberg has used it in the case of Palestine, and he used to say, "You don't shoot at your own people." And that is how we view them, the police in Åland. The policeman in Åland is one of us. Real autonomy is built on a democratic system with general elections in place. That goes without saying. But it's also important to have the financial system in place. We do not get any subsidies, and that is, of course, an advantage. But we do not, on the other hand, have our own taxation as most autonomous territories. I will not start that discussion here, but it's important to have the financial system settled. Åland had that in Geneva in 1921, even if it turned out not to function very well, and it has been altered over the years. All international treaties, as we heard, should also be passed by the parliament in the Åland Islands, and that is the same in Aceh. And I think that we can hear more about this, but I think that that is one of the features taken from the Åland autonomy. And we also heard from the ambassador that there were 2 referendums in Åland about joining the European Union. I will end this by saying that Finland is unique with all its different arrangements. The Åland autonomy, a territorial autonomy decided by an international organization, it is a bilingual country, but not with 2 constituent peoples as in former Yugoslavia, but with 2 equal language communities. With the Sami people having their rights based on the right of indigenous people, with the Romas having much better record in Finland than in many other European countries today. All these groups have become state builders. They created the state of Finland. And they have become state builders over the years, and that is probably the reason why we do not speak about different peoples in Finland. This makes Finland interesting for such studies, and I hope that it could be used for developing mediation initiatives. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Elizabeth, for your wonderful expose. Ms. Knokler is here not because of the seminar. I mean, she's actually on a tourist trip here in New York. So I wonder what kind of presentation there would have been if she would have come here especially for this event. Thank you very much. Our next speaker is a very distinguished diplomat in the Indonesian Foreign Service, Ambassador Pucha, who is now serving as the ambassador of Indonesia to Austria, besides Austria also Slovenia, and then also he is accredited to the UN and other international organizations in Vienna. In his career he has served earlier in Vienna and also besides that also in Geneva twice. And he was very much involved with in the negotiations concerning the Aceh agreement. And I noticed that you were awarded the Satya Lenkana Dharma Nusa Award for your role in the Aceh peace process in 2006. Ambassador Pucha has a master's degree from the Horace A. Rackman School of Graduate Studies, University of Michigan. So once again, thank you very much for taking time coming from Vienna to speak with us to us here, and we cannot wait for your presentation. Please, you have the floor.
Thank you, Ambassador. Excellencies, distinguished participants, ladies and gentlemen, it is my great honor to be invited here to share with you our experience with regard to the finding solution on Aceh conflict. Certainly, when we had the negotiation in Helsinki for 8 months to reach the memorandum of understanding, the agreement on Aceh. The case of Åland Island was on the table. There was discussion on what the similarities that we can take from the case of Åland. Certainly, we found some good example that we could adapt to the solution of Aceh. Certainly, as the Honorable Elizabeth Knokler said, that every case has different and uniqueness situation. Certainly, on the Aceh case also has a very much different case. As in the case of Åland Island, it was actually a dispute between two sovereign states, governments. But in case of Aceh, basically we consider this is a domestic matters of Indonesia. A lot of differences actually on the case of Aland and Aceh, but certainly, especially now, the difference is Åland is very cold, but Aceh is very warm. But I would like to take this opportunity again to thank the committee for inviting me. I involved in the Aceh peace process from the very beginning when the government started to approach the Aceh movement in the year 2000 until 2005 in August 15 when we eventually signed the agreement with the Free Aceh movement. It is known by the acronyms GAM, Gerakan Aceh Merdeka. This is from the Free Aceh Freedom movement. During those 6 years, I went through many ups and downs in the process under three different presidents, respectively President Abdurrahman Wahid, President Megawati Soekarno Putri, and the last one is the President Susilo Bambang Yudhoyono with his very courageous Vice President Yusuf Kala. Certainly this is not easy process. I always told my colleague this is like a roller coaster, sometime up, sometime down. The process is really very, very difficult, not because of the notions of the negotiating itself or the negotiation itself, but also because of the sensitivities of the issue in our domestic political landscape, especially after the fall of the authoritarian regime under President Suharto. We swiftly changed. Indonesia became a very newly democratic country. Therefore, Excellencies, distinguished participants, I will look into this issue and subsequently draw lessons learned from this experience of Aceh from this perspective of practitioner with a direct involvement in this process rather than an academic perspective. But before going further to the negotiation itself, just would like to briefly share with you the Aceh context in terms of its history. The conflict in Aceh was the longest conflict in the history of independent Indonesia. It started actually in early 1950s, only a few years after the Indonesian independence in 1945. Despite the governments of Indonesia's unchanged position on treating the conflicts as an internal issue, the conflict was highly and internationally exposed, twice mediated by international mediators, first by the Henry Dunant Center, and then the name changed into Humanitarian Dialogue Center, and also the CMI under President Mahdi Artiatasari. Also, to better understand the conflict in Aceh, it is always useful to understand the history of Aceh itself and its relations with Indonesia. It was in Aceh actually the first Muslim kingdom established in Southeast Asia. But during the Indonesian struggle for independence against the Dutch, Aceh was the stronghold of Indonesia and was never been completely occupied by the Dutch. despite the rebellions against Jakarta in 1953. Interestingly, that one of the famous leader of Aceh that time had been the most influential local leader in the struggle against the Dutch reoccupation of Indonesia right after Indonesia declared its independence. It lasted only until 1976 when another Aceh leader, his name is Hassan Tiro, established the Aceh Freedom Movement, SGAM. As it was for the previous leader, the second leader, Hassan Tiro, also had the feeling of having being betrayed by Jakarta. Aceh history as a sultanate and the revocation of special autonomy contributed to a sense of political grievances towards Jakarta. A series of broken promises by the central government on one hand and to armed rebellion by the Acehnese against the territorial integrity and of the Republic of Indonesia on the other hand created deep mistrust between the two parties, which in later stage would become the most difficult challenges in the process of negotiation. It was certainly a very long road to Helsinki before we reach agreement. The first attempt to end the conflict in Aceh actually was tried in 1959 when it was designated a special region with an autonomy in religion, culture, and education, basically almost similar to what was given to Åland Island. And 1976, when the leader of the Free Aceh movement, Hassan Tiro, founded the Free Aceh movement, which subsequently brought Aceh into an internal armed conflict. There was no serious attempt to create peace in Aceh until 25 years later. And the relation between Jakarta and Aceh were dominated by armed conflict during the period of time. However, the fall of President Suharto in 1998, which led to political reform and democratization of Indonesia, opened a new window of opportunity for peacemaking in Aceh. Peace was clearly given another chance when, under the president after Suharto's fall, President Abyei, he is our president, which heavily German educated actually, so he lived mostly in Germany. He made a breakthrough by extending his apology for abuses of individual soldiers during the preceding decade in Aceh. And during the subsequent reform era, the Free Aceh movement finally agreed to peace negotiations. Although the formal negotiations were not started until 2000, preconditions for negotiation were built seriously. The military option was seen no longer considered, at least temporarily, because nobody convinced actually at that time that the military solutions will prevail. But political will to create peace that time was obviously cultivated among the elites in Jakarta, and political capital was expanded by taking advantage of momentum of the democratization in Indonesia. In January 2000, political will was translated into real action for the first time by President Abdurrahman Wahid through his visit to Geneva, where he clearly, that time to the international and diplomatic community, he declared that he support the peace process and political dialogue for finding solution in Aceh, and he decided to choose Henry Dunant Center for mediating this dialogue. Why he chose Henry Dunant Center for these mediations? I tell you a little bit secret, because our president that time, President Abdurrahman Wahid, very much fond of two heroes. First is the French heroine, whose name Florence, and also the second one is Henry Dunant. So that's why, because he admired these two heroes, he actually decided one of them he encouraged him to choose Henry Dunant Center as the mediator. And Henry Dunant Center was chosen to honestly broker the peace process, which started with what is called humanitarian pause. It's probably a kind of new term in the conflict resolutions, and what it was actually led to what I called as an Hassan summit, because coincidentally that the three parties in that time, the two parties of split GAM from Sweden and GAM from Malaysia. GAM from Sweden was led by Hassan Tiro, and GAM from Malaysia was led by Hussaini Hassan, and our chief negotiator, our former foreign minister, Hassan Wirayuda. So the three Hassans actually met coincidentally in this first round of humanitarian pause. It was reached in May 2000 when we, the government of Indonesia and Free Aceh movement, agreed to reduce violence in Aceh in order to give a chance for the humanitarian aid to be delivered to Aceh that time. However, the humanitarian pause did not last very long, generally because although actually it was good enough to reduce the level of violence on the ground, but it was not comprehensive enough to prevent a renewal of conflict and violence. Also, it actually failed to build a confidence, mutual confidence and trust between the parties on the ground. Although actually between the negotiators, our part and Indonesian governments and the Free Aceh movement, there was a somewhat opportunity and successful attempt to build confidence building, but on the ground the situation actually was very much different. And as the first humanitarian pause failed, there was an attempt to renew the humanitarian pause by giving what is called a moratorium in the year 2001. But it is again a very brief period before there was another conflicts erupted in Aceh, and two parties lost their mutual trust. That's why our president that time, President Abdurrahman Wahid, lost his passion, and then he instructed and permitted to redeploy more troops in Aceh, and then the war was not able to be prevented that time, and then more escalation of conflict and violence on the ground. And when the next President Megawati, took office after President Abdurrahman Wahid was forced to step down in the middle of 2001, among her first strategic political decision was the signing of legislation granting Aceh special autonomy after decades of government hostility towards this idea. This deal, while never actually fully implemented at the time, Aceh was renamed by expressing the respect of the cultural identity of Aceh. Aceh was named Nangru Aceh Darussalam, and also in this autonomy package, Islamic law, it's called Sharia law, it was offered also within the Nangru Aceh Darussalam, and also the direct election at the provincial and district levels was over. And the most important thing is the revenue sharing. It was offered that Aceh will receive 70% of their natural resources revenue, and then 30% to the central government. Actually, it was a very, very drastic offer given by the government of Indonesia. It was in which previously the revenue of Aceh was given only 5%, but since then it was over 70%, from 5% to 70%. It's really a big step given by the government. However, the Aceh movement still very much adamant, and they refuse the package, and they still insist on the independence. In early 2002, when Megawati was not re-elected, and we had a new president under the current President Susilo Bambang Yudhoyono with his very courageous Vice President Yusuf Kala. Basically, that time, Susilo Bambang Yudhoyono in 2002 was the coordinating minister of Indonesia, and Yusuf Kala was the economic coordinating minister actually, and basically both of them very much knowledgeable on the issue of Aceh. And in early 2002, after ups and downs, after many broken promises by the two parties, after escalation of conflicts, and we started again the negotiation, which eventually resulted what is called cessation of hostilities agreement, COHA, on the 9th of December 2002. However, it was not lasted very long. It was lasted only 5 months before it was collapsed during the negotiation in Tokyo in May 2003. What interesting part of this stage during the cessation of hostilities agreement, during the process, we had what is called wise men, 4 wise men which help us in the process of negotiation. They were General Anthony Sini from the United States, former Foreign Minister of Thailand, Surin Pisuan, and also former Yugoslavian Foreign Ministers, Budimir Lončar, and at the later stage, former Swedish diplomat Bengt Söderberg joined the group of wise men at the later stage. These four wise men help the two parties actually to build a confidence. However, unfortunately, the cessation of hostilities agreement collapsed in May 2003 in Tokyo, and then from that time, the war, the conflicts in Aceh getting more and more deteriorating. But since then, there was another opportunity, probably thanks to the tsunami on 26th of December 2004, which actually bring another windows of opportunity for the two sides to agree to sit on the table to negotiate again, thanks to the facilitation of the CMI under the chairmanship of former President Finland, Martti Ahtisaari. And it was actually very much the best political will exhibited by our leaders, the presidents, Susilo Bambang Yudhoyono, and the vice president, which very much encouraged us to reach this agreement. It was very, very difficult for the negotiating team like me, because we were only given 8 months to settle this problem of 30 years of conflict. This is like doing mission impossible, you know, because it was an instruction that we have to finish and bring the agreement on the 17th of August 2005, where we celebrate our Independence Day. So basically, we were given only 8 months to reach agreement, and with 5 rounds of negotiation, thanks to the skillful of expertise of President Martti Ahtisaari, we eventually reached this very historical agreement. And now, after 7 years, this is the longest peace that we experience in Aceh. After the conclusion of the negotiation, and after the Helsinki's agreement reached, and the two parties, Indonesian government and Free Aceh movement, agreed to faithfully implemented the memorandum of understanding, among others, that the government of Indonesia withdrew the non-organic troops and non-organic police, and the Free Aceh movement agreed to lay down their weapons, and there was the commissioning process, and also the opportunity for the Free Aceh movement members to be given opportunity to involve in the political process. The local political parties was established. This is the first ever experience by Indonesia to give local political parties existed in one province. And also there was a new law on the autonomy of Aceh was given. So despite the sensitivity of these issues, even my president at that time was trying to be courted in the parliaments. There was a movement in the parliament to bring him down, but the government at that time very much determined to bring peace in Aceh. Even the result of the local election, the former members of movement, Irwandi Yusuf was elected as a new governor of Aceh, and many of the chairmen of the districts in Aceh after this free elections, actually from members of the Free Aceh movement. Of course, the difficult part of this process is the implementation of the Memorandum of Understanding. Among others, is how to bring the former rebels to the normal life of the civilian in Aceh. But now there was still very much dissatisfactions among the members of former Free Aceh movement, because not everybody have the opportunity to enjoy the economic prosperity in Aceh. Now the business in Aceh is very, very good, and the economic growth also is very, very good. However, because of not every members of the movement has expertise in this economic life. Many of them were put aside, but of course this created another problems for the new governor. But still, we are very much determined to bring and to keep this peace after we enjoy 7 years now into Aceh. Although there is another possible hiccup because in a couple of months there will be another local election, both for the parliament and for the new governors. We are hoping that there is no big conflict, and we are hoping this in this new democratic country, so we will be able to maintain peace in Aceh. What lesson learned from the ups and downs of this process? From my experience throughout the 6 years ups and downs of the peace process, there are some important lessons to be drawn. First, a strong commitment for peace from the national leadership is an indispensable precondition. Second, peace deals need to be as comprehensive as possible to encompass all aspects required to prevent the renewal of conflict. Third, an overall political settlement of the dispute will have a better chance for success than the sequence approach as we experienced before during the humanitarian pause. Fourth, democratic political environment is an important enabler for a peace process. The MOU of Helsinki 2005 must also be seen in the broader context of the remarkable transformation in Indonesian political landscape between 1998 and 2005, both in the dimensions of democratization and the dramatic eclipse of military influence over civil politics. Fifth, the psychology of negotiation should be taken into consideration seriously. It was for this very reason that the government of Indonesia deliberately selected a negotiating team which could enable mutual confidence to flourish and engage in a far more constructive, less take it or leave it fashion. 6, there is a need for a strong and experienced mediator with a high-level international contacts and a strong commitment to be fair and tough, which we experience from the expertise of former President of Finland, Martti Ahtisaari. And last but not least, the internal consolidation to build intra-party cohesion should be pursued prior to the direct negotiation, so that the negotiators will be the sole legitimate voices and representatives of the respective parties. This is mainly aimed at ensuring that internal divisions within the respective parties will not ruin at the later stage the hard-won agreement resulting from the negotiation. Finally, I remember one said that if you want peace, talk to your enemies, not to your friend. So that's conclude my remarks. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Ambassador, for your very comprehensive review on the situation in Aceh and the solution and arrangement there. There were a lot of specificities exactly for Aceh, but of course there were some similarities on some other issues which are still ongoing. And you highlighted also very well the importance of the personalities and the political leadership skills of certain personalities, and also the need to be very innovative on the matters. On the lessons learned concerning that at least in Aceh, the comprehensive settlement worked much better than a gradual settlement. I don't know whether there's something that we could learn something for some other places where we have tried, or the international community with the partners have tried with the gradual approach on the matters. I liked very much about that what you said in the end. If you want to have peace, talk to your enemies, don't talk to your friends. This sounds to me much better than if you want to have peace, prepare for war. So this is a much better wording. Okay, we have still ample time for questions and answers and any comments. Let's proceed in a way that we take 3 questions or comments at a time, and if you would like to address them to any of the panelists, so please do so, but if you want to have more general comments or questions, so please do so also. Let's start once again with you there. Thanks.
Is it on? Should I stand up or no? Okay. With my luck, I'll lose everything. You already explained the weather, so thank you, Ambassador Puja. I just have a quick question, and I also want to say thank you to Finland and Åland in this role, and especially to Finland for having become the 159th country to ban landmines just a couple of days ago. So I'm with you, NEP. But my question anyways is, I don't know the details fully, but I was hoping that you could talk more about the role of women in the peace negotiations. Were women part of the peace negotiations? If they were part, what were the benefits? If they were not part, what do you think could have been done better? Thank you.
Thank you. And then we have Warren Hogue here in front.
Warren Hogue, IPI. Ambassador Puja, you mentioned that the economic prosperity that has come to Aceh post-settlement is not as evenly spread among all the residents as you would wish. But I want to ask you about the political representation, specifically the former members, the former rebels, the members of the Free Aceh movement. Have they formed a political party? Has one of the Indonesian political parties taken up their cause and given them representation?
Thank you. Do we have a third question here? Please, there in the middle.
Thank you. Thank you very much for a very good panel. I'm Matti Lehtonen from UN Environment Program here in New York, and I especially was paying attention to Ambassador Puja, your remark on going from 5% to 70% in the share of natural resources and revenues from natural resources. And I was wondering if there is some sort of lessons learned for mediators in a way how to present it. Is it better to go into details on how this is done, or is it better to keep it more vague? Is it based on the existing local structures, or more managed from the center? And I think the background of this question is that as was mentioned by Madame Lauclair earlier, that there is the more economic interest involved, but then there is also a question of the symbolic value of having sovereign or interest in having the sovereign right to decide ownership and all that of natural resources, and how the mediator can manage those expectations by parties. Thank you.
Thank you. 3 questions here. And 2 were specifically to Ambassador Pucha. I would hate to ask the question concerning women's participation in this, always from women. I would prefer to ask it from Ambassador Pucha, but because there are already 2 questions to him. So would you like to comment anything on the women's participation on any of the processes? Or shall we leave everything to Ambassador here? Let's do so, please.
Well, I'm trying to respond as I can with regard to the participation of women during the negotiation. Yeah, unfortunately, that our team from the very beginning, when we started these negotiations from the year 2000 until 2005. Mainly consists of men, but this is not because we discriminate women in this respect, but this is a matter of choice by our leader. But the most important things during the humanitarian pause, from humanitarian pause until the cessation of hostilities agreement, what I consider the best opportunity of role of women was our president, Megawati. Megawati is a woman, of course, our president, and she gave very firm directions on how we have to move in terms of negotiating with the Free Aceh movement. Both in terms of how to secure the agreement, and at the end, when we saw that there was no chance, the Koha agreed that she also decided, well, we have to abandon the negotiation, and then let's do another war. That's basically because of our president was a woman also. She played a very crucial role in this respect. Although the negotiating team at that time, most of us were men, but in the members of the Free Aceh movement, I recalled that there was 1 or 2 women in their team. I remember that they came mostly from not from Aceh, but she lives abroad actually. That's why she was brought to the negotiating. Although she played basically behind the screen, not on the table face to face with the government, but I know very much that they were brought 1 or 2 women were brought to this process also as advisor for the Free Aceh movement. So it was quite encouraging that women also played a very crucial role in this respect. Secondly, with regard to the political representation, political parties, that's actually after we reached the agreement, the memorandum of understanding, that's we agreed to establish local political parties. So the Free Aceh movement agreed to change their struggle from bullet to ballot. So they created local political parties called Aceh Party, Partai Aceh, and which actually during the local election, this party won the majority of the parliament, the local parliament in Aceh. I think more than 35% from many political parties, national level parties, which participate in the local election, and also there were some other local political parties also, and now they are the majority in the local parliament. In addition to that, in the national parliament also, there are many distinguished figures from Aceh in the national parliament, representing some national political parties. And also in the regional parliamentarian, we have also regional representative from each. We have 33 provinces, and from Aceh there are I think 5 members, which some of them former rebels. They were directly came from jungle to Jakarta to participate in this political process at the national level. And about the sharing of revenues from 5% to 70%, it is actually stated in the Memorandum of Understanding. We were not shy to mention this. It is in the Memorandum of Understanding that the share should be 70% given to the Aceh people and 30% for the central government. Even before we reach the Helsinki's Memorandum of Understanding, as I told you, during the previous presidencies, Megawati, in the autonomy package that offered to the Free Aceh movement, it was mentioned that 70% of revenue from the natural gas and oil to be given to the Achenese people, and 30% to basically it was on paper. It is not a vague concept. So that's why now Aceh province is very much prosperous. There's a lot of economic development. Of course, the U.S. Oil companies, ExxonMobil, very much exists, and also to some extent played important roles during the conflict in the past. Well, that's. I hope my response, which hopefully satisfy your inquiries. Thank you so much.
Certainly, thank you very much for that. Would you like to comment on at this stage? Yes, please.
I'd like to thank you for the question about the women in the peace process. I think that the gender perspective is extremely important in all conflict solution. But in 1921, there were no women involved in this decision making, and still it was a good decision. So, but I hope now when we are preparing for a new act of autonomy in the Åland Islands, this time it will be no decision making in the sauna. It's going to be an open process with a lot of debate and discussions. And I think that women really they can contribute with that. And they want to open and good process.
Thank you. Okay, please.
Just to add to what Mrs. Gunell said, that as you know, Finland was the first country in the world having full political rights, and there were 19 women out of 200 in the first first parliament, a bit more than 100 years ago, there were no quotas and no positive discrimination at that time. And Finland was the first country to have a majority of women in the government. The first female ASG in the UN system came from Finland, Mrs. Elvi Sipilä. And the first female Minister of Defense in the world, Elisabeth Rehn, came from Finland, and she had also an outstanding career and has an outstanding career in the UN system. And both have been presidential candidates, and they've paved the way for the actual president, Mrs. Halonen. But in the Åland Islands, it took 100 years before they sent a woman to the parliament in Finland. The 1325, the UN resolution 1325, is crucial to the work in the Finnish parliament. A lot of stress is put on it, and of course because these outstanding women and their UN careers. And it is, I think it is very important and very that to give a strong support to this, and there's no debate even on it. It's obvious to everyone, and it's brought up in every single meeting, also by men. We are very much aware of in the Åland Islands that the autonomy has been created by specialists, and I think that's very much why it has been created by men, and that is why it is so strict and so regulated and so technical. And just as Mrs. Gunnar is saying, there is a demand for more openness, for more creativeness, for more political discussions, and I think that will result in more trust. Thank you.
Thank you. Let's take more questions. There's the first one, please.
Hi, Doug Hostetter from the Mennonite Central Committee. I'd like to address my comment to Ambassador Puja. Mennonite Central Committee was very involved in the relief and reconstruction in Aceh afterwards, after the tsunami, and I would be very interested to know from you, hear your comments on what it was about that crisis that enabled the rebirth of the negotiations for successful, to come to successful conclusions. What was it that helped to bring about that change? Thank you.
Thank you. Any other questions or comments? Yes, please.
Roma Stibber of the NGO Sustainability. I was just wondering if anyone would like to suggest a current dispute where either of these examples could be applied and help further the peace process.
Thank you. Anything more? May I just ask one additional thing, even though you have in a way answered to that already? I mean, very often when we speak about the peaceful settlement of disputes and mediation, when we have people coming from academia, they very much speak about science. And then when we speak about the actual actors on the ground, the negotiators, they speak about art. That each and every situation is a specific situation. So from your experience, how do you see when solving this kind of issues, how much there is always art and how much there is science with this, involved with these matters?
So let me take this as opportunity. On the first question, what actually bring the change of and to make the last attempt of negotiations on Aceh was successful? There are so many elements actually. It was first probably on the other side of the coin, we thank the tsunami. Tsunami brought a completely a different momentum for the two parties to come back to the negotiation process. Actually, in May 2003, after the negotiation in Tokyo collapsed, there was no much hope actually for two parties back to the negotiation, because the Indonesian military brought more troops to Aceh at that time just to crush the movement, and what it was a bloody war actually at that time. There was no hope domestically. Also, the issue was very sensitive. Even from the very beginning, I have to confess, when we initiated this talk with Aceh, Free Aceh movement, the politician and the military was our enemy actually, because they said it is illegal to sit equal footing with the Free Aceh movement. There is no mandate for the negotiating team to talk with them. So if this to be brought to reality, the politicians say we will impeach the president, something like that. So much enemies in our in our process. It was, I said, it's always an ups and downs. Whenever there was an opportunity, military always tried to that time tried to make the peace failed. But aside from the tsunami, which brought actually the two sides, enough is enough. Conflict is so bloody, so many victims, and always civilian is the victim of this kind of conflict. And we did not see any opportunity that military solution prevailed in this respect. That's why, as enough is enough spirit, so we agreed to come back to the negotiation. But basically, it was thanks to the leadership of our president and vice president, Susilo Bambang Yudhoyono and Yusuf Kala, which very much encourage us, support us full-fledged to bring peace in Aceh and to negotiate with the Free Aceh movement. Although domestically it was still very sensitive, as I told you. The member of parliament threatened the president to be impeached if we started the negotiation. Military was not fully controlled that time, but with a very strong determination of our leaders, this bring this negotiation back to on track. And of course, the Free Aceh movement leadership also very much aware about the solution, military solution. Also, they did not see any chance to win, and that's why from the very beginning we tried to set a condition in which in this negotiation nothing is agreed until everything is agreed. So we gave a kind of psychological comfort even for the Free Aceh movement to sit down with us, nothing taken for granted, or take it or leave it. But suddenly we negotiated in a very good faith, again thanks to the mediation of the CMI President Marty Ahtisaari. And whether Aceh could be a good example for any solution, but again, as mentioned by the Honorable Elizabeth Nuclear, that's we cannot copy every solution to other solution. It has a very unique character. Aceh for me is a very, very complex situations, both in Aceh and also in the domestic landscape of Indonesia. It is not easy even to convince our politicians to agree on what we have reached in Helsinki, and also because of the military role also very much now decrease in politics. This bring the opportunity for this peace solution. And also very important is the roles of the international community in this respect. For implementation of the cessation of hostilities agreement in 2002, we were very much supported by the European Union, the US government, and also by the Japanese government to the KOHA being successful, but unfortunately it collapsed. But with the experience of the Helsinki Agreement, we were very much supported by ASEAN and also by the European Union. That's why in the composition of the Aceh monitoring mission, it composed of generals and military officers from the members of the European Union and also from the ASEAN. It is also very, very good example on how we also empower the regional organization in involving them in the peace process. So ASEAN played a very pivotal role also in keeping this memorandum of understanding, the agreement, until now on very, very successful. Of course, one general from Finland, General Jaakko, is very, very much involved. Even until now on, he is still in Aceh. That's why probably he's not able to join us today here from the CMI. He keeps monitoring the situation in Aceh, especially now the political tensions a bit higher in Aceh because Acehese people will face in a couple of months another local election. And your last question, Ambassador, it is how to combine this art and science. Well, diplomacy, I think, sometimes is considered as an art. So it's a lot of diplomatic efforts during the negotiation. From the very beginning, I have to confess, during even in the year 2000, when we had this humanitarian pause, cessation of hostilities agreement and the Helsinki agreement, it's a lot of diplomatic maneuvers exhibited during this process. From the first part, even because we are facing with movement, which basically they live abroad. They were not diplomats like us, and some of them just out from jungle to negotiate with us. That's why from the beginning, when Henry Dunant Center facilitated us, they hired one Harvard professor, Bill Urey, to teach the Free Aceh movement how to negotiate. So there was an attempt also from the mediators and how to behave because when we met with them, the Free Aceh movement, they always say no, no, and no. Only independence, independence, and independence. And it was a non-starter, of course, for us. when we negotiate with this very stubborn movement. And then Bill Uri was brought to negotiate, to teach the Free Aceh movement how to get yes or no. That's based on his very famous book, of course. And it was to some extent quite successful. And then the Free Aceh movement also learned how to make this negotiation process as an art, not as a science. Of course, as a scientist, as Harvard professor, of course, Bill Uri very much inspired us on how to have a scientific part of this negotiation. Even during the Helsinki process, GAM also decided to have one advisor from Australia, a professor from Australia. His name is Kingsbury, Damien Kingsbury. He acted as an advisor to the Free Aceh movement, so that the Free Aceh movement should not be bullied by the Indonesian delegation by that time. But of course, it's an art. We enjoyed very much how to put pressure, how to give an ultimatum, and how we have to go back, and how we have to exhibit the utmost flexibility in this negotiation. I hope I answer your yes. question, Ambassador.
Thank you very much. Camilla, Elizabeth, would you like to add here something?
Well, I'd like to say that I think everybody needs science and knowledge, but I also think politics is an art. Because there are people's agendas, priorities, and you have to have the creativity to find new ways and to create trust and understanding. And that is a quite demanding process, and it takes a lot of creativity, and it's an art, I think.
Thank you.
To say a little bit about these conflicting areas that could be in question, as I said, this is not a model that can be copied, but there are always small details and track the interest from all over the world. And both sides in the Nagorno-Karabakh crisis, they have been brought to the Åland Islands, the Armenian side and the Azeri side, as well as the people from Nagorno-Karabakh. This was during the time of the presidency in the Minsk group of Finland. And that is an ongoing process, but as we heard, there has to be some pressure, there has to be some will, some commitment, etc. But I'm sure that our experiences could be conducive to the Nagorno-Karabakh process. Okinawa, they have been very interested in the Åland case because I think of our influence on the international treaties. They have very little influence on the treaties between Japan and the US. And the military presence, of course, the demilitarization, neutralization, etc. You can think about different restrictions. The Northern Territories, they have been involved in, they've been to the Åland Islands discussing this. Moldova, especially Transnistria, and there, of course, the detail about the kin state is the role of the kin state. As I said, Sweden is maybe a model when it comes to kin state in our conflict resolution. Tibet, they have been interested in our autonomy. Western Sahara, of course. I'm in constant discussions with your ambassador in Helsinki. The Basque country, they have a very well worked out autonomy, more extensive autonomy than we have in many ways, but you know how the process has been in Spain, and there is a shift now. This is all the time an ongoing process, and it's not only that others are looking at us, but we are also looking at others. We are looking at the other Nordic autonomous territories. Corsica, the Central Power in Paris brought representatives from Corsica together with the Minister of Interior from Paris to the Åland Islands. So I think that there is so much to learn, not only from Åland, but from Finland. As I said, we have territorial autonomy, and the Swedish-speaking community in Finland, they have what one would in Balkans have called personal autonomy. And this is another form of autonomy, and I think that they are interesting. There are interesting elements that could definitely be conducive to a peace negotiating process here and there.
Thank you very much. Before concluding this segment of today's panels, we have another panel starting immediately. I just want to say that there's a new book, The Åland Example and Its Components, Relevance for International Conflict Resolution. Unfortunately, I guess we have only 1 or 2 copies here, but we try to get more copies to New York so that those who are interested in that so could actually get hold on this very good book. This session was called Lessons Learned from the Åland Islands and Aceh. The next panel is going to be Continuing Challenges in Abyei and Kurdistan region of Iraq. I don't know whether these are going to be serving an example for possible solutions there. I would like to thank very much our wonderful panelists for the insight you provided, and I thank also the audience for the very active participation. It's been wonderful to chair this panel, and we are going to continue without any break here. We just change a little bit the arrangement here in front, and we start in 5 minutes. Thank you very much.
Excellencies, distinguished participants, ladies and gentlemen, let me commence our second panel this morning. We thank you all for staying with us until this time. We are very much encouraged. I hope you stay here because you find this topic is very interesting, not because you have no work at the UN. So we have 3 panelists this second session. I hope I would be able to conduct this second panel as efficient as Ambassador Finanen. We hope that we can close this second panel by 12:45 p.m. Before we have the closing remarks before 1 p.m. I would like also to thanks first of all the 3 panelists who are with us for this session. Excellencies, distinguished participants, as we continue our discussion, where we will hear presentations from 3 distinguished panelists who will later on focus on ongoing disputes in 2 different regions, Abyei, I hope I spell it correctly, and the Kurdistan region of Iraq, and the continuing challenges concerning autonomy, territory and cultural rights within these regions. This panel will also examine the role of the United Nations in the mediation and resolution of this and other similar conflicts, including the preventive tools at its disposal and the increasing importance of regional and sub-regional partnership. As we have heard, the first panel before us dwelled into the lessons learned from the conflict resolution in Åland Islands and the Aceh province of Indonesia, using the special autonomy scheme and how this approach was opted and applied successfully in those two cases. Mindful of the uniqueness of the situations in different conflict settings, and that each society has different ways of achieving equity and justice as well as reconciling its differences, I am very much confident that there are some fundamentals that frequently underpin peaceful and sustainable resolutions of conflicts. In this regard, I'm very much encouraged that the discussions in the first panel would be able to help stimulate and inspire our discussions in the second panel, particularly on drawing lessons learned from may possibly be related to the situations under our panel discussed at this latter stage. On the issue of Abyei, whose future is still being discussed between Sudan and South Sudan, the discussions and the discussion on applying special autonomy scheme has also been explored. At the same time, the Security Council in its resolutions 1990, 2011, June 2011, has agreed to establish the UN Interim Security Force for Abyei, UNISFA, whose mandates, among others, include the monitoring and verifying the redeployment of any Sudan Armed Forces, Sudan People's Liberation Army, or its successor from Abyei as defined by the Permanent Court of Arbitration. Further, on the issue of the Kurdistan region of Iraq, various articles on this subject have been produced. Among them is one by Dr. Liam Anderson, whose article entitled Avoiding Ethnic Conflict in Iraq, Some Lessons from the Åland Islands, published in June 2010, especially outlining an alternative approach to Iraq's federalism dilemma. Using the exemplar case of the Åland Islands, it is argued that the strongly centralized Arab Iraq is not inherently incompatible with an autonomous Kurdistan region, and that by anchoring the Kurds' autonomous status in international law, a destructive decision towards violent ethnic conflicts can be avoided. Certainly, we will hear more about this issue later on. We will definitely hear more details about this approach and how the autonomy status can be a possible sound options to resolve conflicts in the two regions in a peaceful manner. Before giving the floors to our respective panelists, allow me now to briefly read out the bios of our panelists. We are pleased to have in our midst Dr. Suleiman Baldo, Director, Africa Program, International Center for Transitional Justice. Secondly, Dr. Liam Anderson, Associate Professor of Political Science, Wright State University, and last but not least, Robert Dunn, the Chief ad interim of the Mediation Support Unit in the Policy and Mediation Divisions of the Department of Political Affairs, Director of the Policy and Mediation Divisions, UN Department of Political Affairs. But first of all, I would like to give the floor to Dr. Suleiman Baldo to present his view on the issue. As you know, that Dr. Suleiman Baldo is a widely recognized expert on conflict resolution, emergency relief, development, and human rights in Africa, and on international advocacy around these issues. He has worked extensively in the Democratic Republic of the Congo, Ethiopia, Eritrea, and the Sudan, and has traveled widely throughout the rest of the African continent. Dr. Baldo holds a PhD in comparative literature and Master of Arts in Modern Literature, both from the University of Lyon in France. He also holds a BA from the University of Khartoum in Sudan. So I will read the second and the third speaker later on when I introduce them. We thought further ado, I would like now to give the floor to Dr. Badu, who has you have around 10 to 15 minutes for your presentation. Vous avez la parole.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and very briefly on the very complex conflict in Abyei. January 2012 is actually, represents a couple of anniversaries for Abyei. January 2011, last year, was supposed to take place the referendum on the status of Abyei, whether it wanted to stay as part, of the North, administered from the North, or to join an eventual independent Sudan, because the South was voting for its independence, if you recall, in July of that year. That referendum didn't take place. And it didn't take place because the government of Sudan in Khartoum, the ruling National Congress Party, and the ruling Sudan People Liberation Movement, the SPLM in South Sudan, failed to agree on the criteria of eligibility for the vote in the referendum, plus other issues. The other anniversary that Abyei is very old, territorial issue, before it became dispute or a contentious problem and a conflict, live conflict between North and South. It began with some clans of the Ngok Dinka people of South Sudan in what today is Warab state and Bahr al-Ghazali state of South Sudan, joining under the colonial period. In 1905, the administration of South Kordofan, where the population there is predominantly from the Miseria cattle herders, the Miseria, who claim Arab origin. Over generations prior to 1905 and, until now, these two communities have developed a lot of interaction, and the relation between them are very close. There is an integration of livelihood among the Dinka of the Abyei area, the Ngok Dinka, and the Miseria, their neighbors to the north in South Kordofan. For instance, the Miseria, being cattle herders, migrate into Abyei area during the dry season, in the region, for part of the year in search of pastures and water, which Abyei area has in abundance. The Ngok Dinka are integrated in the manual rural labor of South Kordofan, but also South Darfur, with the other cattle herders in that area. There is a Gat tribe. Therefore, they provide, for example, agricultural manual labor, and there is a very old system whereby the local communities take in the Dinka to, till the land. This is subsistence agriculture, rain-fed and so on. So they do the whole operation, and during the work of the planting, the owners of the land, from these northern groups, pay an advance, to the agricultural laborers, and when it is harvest day, the harvest is divided between the two, 50-50 minus whatever went to the subsistence of the agricultural labor. So there is a lot of interaction between the two groups, and cultural influences that are exchanged, and these are necessary ingredients to consider when we are looking for solutions. The question was raised whether the example of the Åland and Aceh would be of relevance to ongoing conflicts elsewhere. And I'm sad to say that Abyei is a control, model of all that went wrong. So in Abyei, we didn't have demilitarization, neutralization, although it was enshrined in several of the peace agreements, and I will come to discuss this in some detail later. Territorial autonomy, was granted under the Comprehensive Peace Agreement, under the Addis Ababa Agreement, but not acted upon. cultural linguistic safeguards not respected. There is a hegemony of Arab Islamic culture, and the attempt to impose this by state power through control of the media and through control of propaganda is the trigger of identity conflicts throughout Sudan, and not only in relation to Abyei. Finally, the deficit of political commitment to peace is what is plaguing Sudan today, again, not only in relation to Abyei, but across the, what is today the middle belt of Sudan. We see conflicts, erupting throughout the country because of the failure of respect of diversity and the right of populations to live their own cultures and their own, traditions. And therefore, this is an example of all went long, but the ingredients were there in the work of the mediations, as we can see very quickly. Abyei, of course, is home, as I said, to the Meseria and the Dinka Ngok. It has all these natural resources. Oil was discovered in 1979, and it added a degree of complexity, as we could expect, modern resource coming aptly to fuel conflict rather than helping to be a part of the solution. And Abyei was a contentious issue already, I was going to say déjà, Monsieur l'Ambassadeur, already in the first civil war of 1955 to 72. There were several major confrontations there. The Addis Ababa Agreement of 72 recognized a special status for Abyei. However, the government of the day in Sudan at the time, 1972, didn't implement that special status of a particular autonomy to Abyei region, and specifically a referendum on their, whether they wanted to go back, to be administered from within South Sudan. That was a clause that was never implemented. The total reneging on the Addis Ababa Agreement that occurred in 1982, when the government in Khartoum unilaterally subdivided the autonomous self-governed region of South Sudan, was the trigger of the 1982 war, which continued until 2005, as we know well. That was the immediate trigger. So the inhabitants of Abyei have this collective imagery of Khartoum with a long, consistent tradition of dishonoring agreements that are negotiated, signed before witnesses, with UN presence and Council of Churches, All Africa Council of Churches, and other mediators around the table, and failure to respect agreements is what has triggered war in Abyei already. As we know, there have been several attempts, to try and resolve the Abyei situation following best practices. For instance, the Comprehensive Peace Agreement of 2005, and in recognition of the contentious history of Abyei, it granted the Abyei region a special status by recognizing dual citizenship of the Abyei residents, both in the south and the north, attaching Abyei directly to the presidents, not to the the regional transitional government in the south, or to the executive in Khartoum, but to the presidents, which was a joint presidents between the president of South Sudan and of North Sudan, and giving Abyei residents the right to vote for in a referendum for self-determination after a 6-year period of transition. The whole idea of the transitional period was to allow Khartoum to make unity attractive to Southerners, not only in Abyei but throughout Sudan. And making unity attractive is, a very, demanding task of recognizing all the wrongs that occurred during, 4 decades of war, if you add the first phase and the second phase, and the 2 million people killed in South Sudan, the entire areas that were depopulated from their populations. Therefore, owning that legacy and trying to mend it in terms of all the deprivation, in terms of infrastructure, services in the south, and so on. The Comprehensive Peace Agreement was designed not only to end the conflict between North and South, but also to give Sudan an opportunity, a window of opportunity to address the root causes of the conflict, which are precisely this hegemony of the center versus the periphery, and not only the South, but the South is the region that has suffered most from that. And unfortunately, Khartoum didn't deliver on this side of the Comprehensive Peace Agreement. The side of the security arrangements, for example, was very well respected by both parties. There were no major confrontations except a few incidents during the 6 years of transition. The commitment of Khartoum for allowing the process of referendum occurred. Khartoum respected that commitment. But it did very little in terms of implementing democratization, reform of governance, but also making unity attractive, the whole philosophy behind the Comprehensive Peace Agreement. And this is what is bringing Abyei now as a contentious issue. There was a ruling in 2005 by the Abyei Boundary Commission, mandated under CPA, awarding large parcels of land in Abyei region to the south. This happened to be oil-rich areas, and Khartoum outright, rejected that ruling and said there is no way that we can observe it. Two parties we know have agreed to go to the Permanent Court of Arbitration to resolve the issue of Abyei. There was a ruling there again, and again we had, a degree of lack of commitment to that ruling, although initially Khartoum and the SPLM said they were committed to observing that ruling. Incidents started to occur of increasing security tensions, and this culminated, as we know well, in May of 2011 by the outright invasion of the region by the Sudan Armed Forces, the SAF, and the expulsion of the entire Ngok community of 100,000 from Abyei area. They fled into South Sudan beyond the river. Mediation efforts continue, of course, by the international community, and the regional mediating, African Union has a role there. Ethiopia, the regional power, is very active in the mediation circuit, a lot of coordination between these bodies, but mediation is not able to address this. This is because Abyei is very much part and parcel into the internal politics of both the SPLM and the ruling National Congress Party in Khartoum. And both the SPLM and the government in Khartoum have tended to use Abyei in their politicking, for internal partisan gain. For instance, there is a very highly influential quota of the leadership in the SPLM from, the Abyei area, and they are very militant on the issue of what should happen in Abyei, and they hold, they basically limiting the maneuvering room at the negotiation of the SPLM with regard to solutions in Abyei. SPLM included a clause in its, its draft constitution for post-independence, counting Abyei as part of South Sudan. And that clearly is a unilateral decision, because the Comprehensive Peace Agreement said this has to be a negotiated solution. It had a mechanism for it, a referendum, and it had, a lot of details. Then Khartoum used this attempt, unilateral drive from the SPLM, in propaganda and in political agitation, with President Bashir saying Abyei is part of Northern Sudan, it will never be part of the South. His defense minister, the spokesman of the army, making similar belligerent statements. And these are not contributing, of course, to appeasing the situation. At the same time, it's not like, the Miseria are 100% aligned with Khartoum. Miseria have very serious grievances with Khartoum. Their area had oil, it has been pumped, and that oil is drying up, and they have seen next to nothing in terms of investments in social services in their area, in terms of infrastructure in their area, in terms of job opportunities in the oil sector. Khartoum comes up with its own workers from other regions that are seen as closer politically, ideologically, and ethnically, to the central government in Khartoum, and the locals are not even employed for manual labor. And of course, the companies that are employed, are also part of that problem, because they come with their own subcontractors for setting up fences or whatever. So there is a lot of economic grievances because of this. There are grievances related to the fairest cycle of the war. The government used ethnicity as a weapon of war, mobilized the Miseria as militiamen, and to do so promised them that they will be given treatment of army soldiers who are lost in action or wounded in action or become veterans, none of which has been implemented, and the Miseria are very unhappy. And when they are unhappy, they, even during the war, they were threatening to go and join the SPLA, you see. And the SPLA had units of Miseria within its ranks. So it's not like, Miseria with the government and Dinka with the SPLA. It's not precisely that situation. Because of this discontent and grievances, there are armed movements that were formed among the Miseria who attack the oil sector and who attack government forces. Because of such accumulated unhappiness. The SPLM, for its part, is, as I said, held to account by those leaders from the area. Angok people, as I said again, it symbolizes for them Khartoum, this consistent pattern of reneging on agreements and so on. Now, lack of implementation, this is a quote from a prominent southern leader from Abyei, Luka Byong-Deng, that the lack of implementation of the Abyei protocol would make them, would make of Abyei the most contentious point in the North-South issues and the litmus test to stability and peace in the country. And sadly, what is happening today is proving him right because of lack of commitment to agreements that had all these elements, of autonomy and of neutrality and of demilitarization, but the lack of commitment to such agreements, the lack of political will to follow through, mostly on the side of Khartoum, has meant that Abyei is now returning, as a flashpoint and as a very tense situation. The region is sliding back into war, despite UN Security Council resolutions. We are seeing presence of Sudanese army in the area, and they keep coming up with reasons for not withdrawing it, despite clear clauses and provisions in UN Security Council resolutions requiring them to do so. Full deployment of UNIFSA, but given a mandate which is very difficult to implement, given the lack of political will, given the emotional and the political weight of the issues surrounding Abyei. Now, one last comment, two last comments about the comprehensive peace agreement. As I said, it was meant to address the root causes of conflict, and because of the failure to do so on Khartoum side, it's not only Abyei now that is risking to ignite. We have seen armed insurgencies breaking out in South Kordofan among the Nuba Mountains. There are two large ethnic communities in the South Kordofan state, Nubas, who are now fighting the government in Khartoum for, recognition, basically, of their cultural identity. And we have seen similar considerations leading to ignition of conflict in South Blue Nile. But there is a dynamics underway where there is a merger of all armed insurgencies in Sudan taking place today. So there have been alliances that have been formed between the Darfur rebel movements, those from the Nuba Mountains, and from the from Blue Nile. However, there is not only the ethnic factor or the cultural factor of minorities, rising up in arms to protect their rights. The groups that are fighting the government in Khartoum actually fought the civil war on the side of the SPLM in Sudan. And they had the special status in the comprehensive peace agreement. And because of the unilateral decision on trying to end that special status immediately after Southern independence in July of last year, that these movements, we basically decided to fight the government because the government tried to disarm them. Now, you can have pity of the predicament of Khartoum. With the SPLM going away with the South as an independent state, the largest, most organized, most threatening political opposition to Khartoum in the north was the northern branch of the SPLM. And the largest military armed elements that were not DDR'd, that were not demobilized, disarmed, and so on. This is again a failure of implementing, the CPA consistently. They were not, they were still carrying their arms. Again, was the SPLM. So Khartoum really felt, threatened. We had a situation that Khartoum was basically feeling, under siege. At the same time, it didn't prepare for the economic impact of the Southern independence. And at the same time, there has been a sort of an internal palace coup in Khartoum with military extremists from within the army, taking over and telling the political, ideological extremists, you are soft house, you stay out of the formula. President Bashir going along with the extremists. And now we have a situation, mediation is continuing, the talks are continuing in Addis Ababa, but the positions are extreme because of this militarism and militarization of governance in Khartoum, particularly on the negotiation side, and the SPLM basically is held hostage, not only an Abyei, but all the post-Southern independence, the issue of revenue of the oil, demarcation of the border, citizenship issues have yet to be settled. The last point is actually about mediation mechanisms. Sudan played the game of divide to rule very well with the UN, ending up with 3 UN Security Council authorized peacekeeping missions in the country. And very dedicated bureaucracy in Khartoum, making sure that this doesn't coalesce into some level of reinforcement of UN efforts. They really have to be kept apart, and there is a whole bureaucracy to ensure that this is happening. African Union has entered into the game through the Darfur conflict. They sent the first peacekeeping mission there. They were the first mediators in Abuja talks, before that even in Jamena talks. And then the mediation for the peace agreement became a joint African Union, United Nations mediation in the Doha process, with the Qataris coming in as facilitators, but in reality seen from the Arab perspective as also mediators. So this created a crowded scene of 3 SRSGs and 4 at one point, and a joint African Union, United Nations mediation who is not exactly responding, to either, this is my reading of it, correct me if I'm wrong. But it was a situation where Khartoum was very happy because it managed to basically put the mediation mechanisms and the envoys in disarray through playing one mechanism against the other, and so on. However, I still believe that there is possibility if there is a consolidation of mediation efforts towards, a comprehensive framework that addresses all these conflicts, including Abyei and the others, in one framework rather than what's happening now by the diplomats, which is firefighting diplomacy, running from one problem to the other when it's about to go into a major issue. Thank you. Yeah.
Thank you very much, Mr. Waldo, for your insightful presentations. Of course, the case of Abyei is very much interesting now, because as explained by Dr. Waldo, that he describes this Abyei cases from the territorial issue, integrations of livelihood, comprehensive political settlement, and also the deficit of political commitment of peace of the leaders. He also explained how the failure of the parties to respect the government and of course the root causes of the conflicts, and the mediation mechanism is also touched upon, including the economic grievances and comprehensive peace agreements. Of course, the issue has a degree of complexity, and because of degree of lack of commitment. So let's see how in the future the parties concerned will find their way to have this peace agreement. Next, we will hear from Dr. Liam Anderson on the issue of Kurdistan region of Iraq. Dr. Liam Anderson is currently an associate professor of political science at Wright State University, where he teaches classes in comparative politics and international relations. He obtained his MPhil in international relations from Cambridge University and his PhD in political science from the University of Georgia. His research interests include issues on constitutional designs, particularly, you are not designer, right?
Sorry?
You are not designer, or do you?
Intellectual designer.
Intellectual designer. Particularly with reference to ethnically divided states such as Iraq. As I mentioned earlier, one of Dr. Anderson's recent publications include, among others, Avoiding Ethnic Conflict in Iraq, Some Lessons from the Åland Islands, which was published in the journal Ethnopolitics. He's currently working on a Delphi paper for the International Institute for Strategic Affairs on the disputed territories of northern Iraq, to be published in the spring of 2012. You have the floor, Dr. Anderson.
Thank you. Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. I was actually going to start by mentioning my article because nobody's mentioned it since I wrote it. And then I actually come here and find that this actually was mentioned twice by the same person. Thank you very much. The title of it was Avoiding Ethnic Conflict in Iraq, Some Lessons from the Aland Islands. And now, of course, I come here, show up today and realize that I'm writing about a territory that I apparently can't even pronounce correctly. So I apologize to the delegation from the Åland Islands. But in this paper, I was making an argument which entirely objectively I think is utterly compelling about why the Aland Islands might serve as a model for the Kurdish issue in northern Iraq. But 3 years on and zero citations on and no comments positive or negative about this paper. And you begin to wonder whether this really is that much of a compelling argument at all. Unfortunately, and people may be aware of this, Google Scholar now there's a thing called Google Scholar, it's a little pull down thing, and you can find out how few people have actually cited your paper. So my current citation level stands at 0 for this paper. And you're sort of wondering whether you're the crazy one. by making this connection? Or is it you're the sane one and everybody else is the crazy ones? So it's quite gratifying to come here, I think, and to find that even if I am still the crazy one, I'm at least surrounded by fellow crazy people who are making this connection. I do actually have some copies of this paper. Please. I only actually have 4 copies. I'm happy to email anybody in the unlikely event that demand exceeds supply. You could have, I mean, you may have the dubious honor of being the first person to actually read this paper. So there you go. The offer's out there, but apart from me, of course, and my mother, maybe. I don't think she managed to get her way through it. Anyway, I think there is a tension between political scientists and practitioners on these issues, in that political scientists tends to deal generally in abstractions and theories that may or may not have any relevance to realities on the ground that practitioners are often facing. It also helps, of course, if you're sitting in your ivory tower in the safety of Cambridge, Massachusetts, putting forward theoretical ideas about how to deal with certain situations that you're not going to have to face the consequences for on the ground if it all goes to pot. But I think when academics first started writing about post-war Iraq in the early 2000s, I guess, I think they fell very much into this trap because there was an initial consensus, at least, that on 2 things, I would say, within the academic community. And this, I'm talking about publications in some quite influential journals, things like Foreign Affairs. I would say the initial consensus was that Iraq would need to be a federal system, because given its track record of highly centralized, dominant central government in Baghdad, the guarantee against the re-centralization of power would be provided by a federal system. And that secondly, the system should be based around the 18 existing governorates of Iraq. So in other words, you had the boundary lines in place, inherited from the Ba'ath regime, make them all federal regions, you got your federal system. Now, the real problem with this argument, as anybody would know who knows the Kurdish issue in Iraq, is that this is a total non-starter for the Kurds. The Kurds would never have accepted this. Kurdish leaders at the time were actually very concerned about whether their people could even be persuaded to carry on as part of the state of Iraq. There was I think, very large groundswell of public opinion in northern Iraq that this was the time to push for an independent Kurdish state. So really, the minimum that the Kurds were prepared to accept for staying as part of Iraq was an autonomous, unified Kurdish region. So in that sense, the starting point for any discussion of a federal system in Iraq has to deal with that as a reality. The reality is an autonomous Kurdish region. And once you establish that, the interesting or more important question becomes how you arrange the rest of Iraq to accommodate that reality. I can't pitch this because I don't have a cover yet for it, but this is taken, I've just completed a book manuscript. Believe me, I would pitch it if I had the book actually here with the cover, but I don't. I've just completed a book manuscript on the design of federal systems and how federal systems can be used to sort of address ethnic issues in divided societies. And as part of that, this is exactly the sort of slide that would make my students glaze over or fall over in a coma. Let's hope it doesn't have quite the same impact. I sort of got all the world's post-1945 federal arrangements and shoehorned them into various categories of federal system, because this is what political scientists do. They shoehorn things into categories. It gives us a sort of sense of achievement, I guess. Some of these categories are not really relevant for today's discussion. We got over here non-ethnic federations. So these are federations in which there is no real ethnic component. These are not ethnically divided societies. Federalism has been adopted in these places for a variety of reasons, but it's not to accommodate ethnicities. Anti-ethnic federations was kind of, I kind of had fun exploring that one, but it's not really relevant. So if we get it down to the relevant cases, I've left non-ethnic federations up there for sort of comparative purposes, but these are ethnic federations, ethno-territorial federations, and federacies. Critics of the idea of having ethnic components in a federal system will lump all of these sort of examples into the same category and call it ethnic federalism. And typically the argument goes, and there's quite a powerful argument out there in the academic community, that ethnic federations are disastrous ways to manage ethnic problems. So they'll put all of these, they'll lump all of these into the same category and then choose cases such as the Soviet Union and Yugoslavia to show why defining things ethnically is a really, really bad idea, because it ends up in the fragmentation of the country. I think, or the argument I would make is that it's actually quite useful to separate out these categories into three different categories of federations with ethnic components, because these three categories actually have very different structures, different internal dynamics, and actually very different success rates. So ethnic federations here, we have Soviet Union, Yugoslavia, Czechoslovakia, Ethiopia, Eritrea. Contemporary examples, Pakistan, Belgium, and probably the purest, in fact, is Ethiopia. These are federations that are defined by ethnicity. So every one of society's major ethnic groups gets its own ethnic region, autonomous ethnic region. Federacies here are structurally different. They are ethnically autonomous units attached to an otherwise unitary state. So there is no system-wide federation. So Finland is a unitary country with an ethnic appendage, if you will. And again, I mean, we can haggle over how we define ethnicity and this sort of thing. The interesting one, for me at least, were ethno-territorial federations. These are structures in which minority ethnic groups are accommodated with their own federal region, federal subunit, but the majority group, or the plurality group, at least the largest ethnic group, is sort of chopped up into multiple subunits. So the largest ethnic group doesn't get its own large subunit. To look at some examples and some of the problems with some of these systems. These are ethnic federations contemporary. I mean, as I say, the purest system is probably Ethiopia, but it's also struggling with the democracy bit of things. In Belgium here, you have basically Flemish speakers in the north and French speakers in the south, Wallonia and Flanders. And essentially the problem with these sorts of arrangements is that they almost always require some sort of very elaborate power-sharing scheme at the center to hold everything together. So you get sort of things like ethnic vetoes, you get power-sharing on the basis often of equality. I mean, the sort of political structures of Belgium are sort of Byzantine. I mean, they're sort of fiendish in their complexity, matched only perhaps by the political institutions of Bosnia. I mean, Bosnia is, as well as having certain cities which are in and of themselves involve ethnic power sharing, you've got ethnic power sharing at the federation level. The whole thing is a federation. So you've got a federation nested inside a federation. Now, I'm not criticizing those who authored the Dayton Peace Accord. You know, you do what you have to do to get some peace. But this is a very unworkable political system at the center. So the problem with these sorts of very elaborate power-sharing systems at the central level is that it sort of condemns the central government to gridlock. The central government becomes unable to actually act. So the real governance takes place at the regional levels. So the most, to the best of my knowledge, and somebody can probably correct me now, we're now about 500 or 600 days since the Belgian election. Belgium still does not have a government. I think probably Bosnia, I mean, they broke Iraq's world record. Iraq held the world record until Belgium stepped in and did it. In the end, it doesn't much matter in Belgium because there's a caretaker government, and most of the effective government takes place at the regional level, not at the central level. So essentially, the problem with these systems is that the center is too weak to hold together the parts. So there's a danger of fragmentation. If we look at federacies, and I actually pulled up this slide. I was given a talk on the Åland Islands at the Middle East Studies Association, and it's mystified. Everyone looking at this, what on earth are you doing talking about the Åland Islands? But this is, there we go, little Ålands down here. And this is another example of a federacy. This is Gagauzia in Moldova. The federacies structurally suffer from the sort of inverse of ethnic federations, in that the problem tends to be that the central government's so much stronger than the autonomous region, which in the case of Gagauzia, it's about 4% of the total Moldovan population lives in Gagauzia. That the danger is that central government sort of starts to whittle away the autonomous status of these units. And this has happened in Gagauzia for fairly obvious reasons, in that it's going to be the ethnic Moldovans are obviously in vast majority in Moldova. They dominate the parliament, they dominate all the institutions. If you dominate the Supreme Court of a country, it's not difficult to find interpretations of an autonomy agreement that allow you to sort of reel in the autonomy. The act that created autonomy for Gagauzia can actually be amended. It requires 60% in the Moldovan parliament. Well, if you're 4% of the population, you can't stop the Moldovan or those representing Moldovans from taking away your autonomy. So the problem here is there's a danger of the central government being too powerful in relation to the autonomous entity. That's much less of a problem with the Åland Islands, which is why it actually caught my attention initially. So this is ethno-territorial federation, Spain being a good example, but also India is another example. The Spanish case, you have Catalonia over here, Galicia, and the Basque Country. The system was designed really to accommodate these three historic nationalities, as they're termed. But around them, the Spanish created this entire system-wide autonomous communities. And so the rest of Spain is divided up. So all of the central part of Spain here, they're all Castilian Spanish, though the Andalusians would probably object to that assignation, but Castilian Spanish, but it's chopped up into multiple units. And this sort of idea, or this structure, provides a better balance. So and part of the reason for this is because once you start creating units, you actually end up creating people who identify with those units. So in other words, La Rioja, I mean, we may be familiar with the wine, but this was not an entity that had any historical existence at all before it was created in 1977. But within 10 years, when the population of La Rioja was polled on this, the vast majority of them identified as strongly with their region as they did with the country of Spain. So in other words, there's been a sort of created identity here. And what this does is it means that the ethnic minority units, Galicia, Basque Country, and Catalonia, are not alone in resisting central government efforts to kind of encroach and reel in their powers. They find themselves on the same side as regions like La Rioja, which is a Castilian Spanish region, but will resist the central government's efforts to reel in the powers of the regions. So in a sense, you get a better balance between power of the central government and the power of the autonomous units under this system. Now, there we go. If we go back to, if we look at the question of the issue of Iraq, really, the reality on the ground is there's going to be a Kurdish region, or there is a Kurdish region. We don't know what the boundaries of this Kurdish region are going to be when they're finally fixed. And really, the rest of the Iraqi federal system is an utter mess. If I were asked to say what lessons could be drawn from the Iraqi experience with federalism, I would say do it in any other way than the Iraqis have actually done it. I'm not blaming the Iraqis here. They were given a lot of advice from various parties, but it's a total mess. If you look at this line here, this red line, I don't know whether I'm better off, I guess I'm better off pointing over here. This is the recognized Kurdish region, this solid red line here. So the federal system is based on the 18 governorates with this sort of region superimposed on top of it. And just a very minor point in a way, but an important one is there are bits that are recognized as part of the Kurdish region that actually belong to other governorates. And there are bits like Makmur down here, which is part of a Kurdish-dominated governorate, but that's outside the officially recognized Kurdish region. If you add to that what the constitution and its sort of allocation of powers to the regions or the governorates rather than the central government. I mean, it's a complete disaster, really. I mean, we can get into quite the complexities of this issue, but it's either vague or in some parts it's actually contradictory. One bit of the Constitution says one thing, another bit contradicts it in another. It's inconsistent, it's a bit of a mess. So the question is, well, you know, I think Iraqi federal system is a work in progress. So what's the best way forward for Iraq? I think we probably remember, because it was quite well known at the time, Joe Biden's suggestion for basically a 3-region, and that would have been a sort of ethnic federation. So a Shia region in the south, a Sunni region in the west and north, and then a Kurdish region in the far north. So that's what Joe Biden was pitching. Leslie Gelb as well from the Council on Foreign Relations. I don't know whether this was based on Joe Biden's sort of encyclopedic knowledge of theories of federalism or the reality on the ground, but that's not a good option really for Iraq, because the track record tells us that has a low chance of survival. You may get a peaceful split there, but that thing I think would stand not much chance of staying together, because it would hollow out the central government. The central government would not be powerful enough. I mean, as the Constitution stands right now, regions get to control their own resources, or manage their own resources anyway, and they get to have their own armies, basically. So you would have a country with 3 regions, each with its own army, and each managing its own natural resources. I don't know how that would hold together. So the 2 best options for Iraq are either, I think, what I term an ethno-territorial federation, which would be you keep the Kurdish region as is, and then you have 14 regions that are genuinely given powers. So the Arab part of Iraq would become 14 regions. And I think that would provide a good balance. The alternative, and the one that I explored in this paper, if that's obviously not something that's appealing to Iraq's Arab population, is to use the model of the Åland Islands. So in other words, but the particular dimension of that, I actually agree. I should stop talking about the Åland Islands as a model, because the delegation told us it's not a model. So it's not a model. It's an example, right? It's an example. But there's one element to the example that really appealed to me, which was this idea of internationally guaranteed autonomy. Because the problem, as I say, with federacies tends to be that there's a fear in the autonomous region of an overweening central government reeling in its power. And so if you have some sort of higher level of guarantee that this is going to be an autonomous unit for the foreseeable future, as long as everyone plays by the rules, you know, that helps lock in. And it's appealing from both sides. For the central government, they get some sort of guarantee that this autonomous unit can't just decide tomorrow to declare independence. For the autonomous unit, there's some sort of guarantee that if the central government starts taking away the powers, it's going to be an international issue at some level. Now, I mean, maybe our Åland delegation can correct me if I'm wrong here, but the Åland was a League of Nations decision, right? So in that sense, it's sort of embedded in international law. And certainly when the EU when Finland were about to accede to the EU recognized the Åland Islands' right to hold its own referendum on whether to join or not. And as I understand it, Denmark does similar things with the Faroes and Greenland. So in other words, there's some weight to this guarantee. Now, there are other territories as well in the world that have similar sorts of guarantees. China has treaties with Britain and Portugal to guarantee the autonomous status of Hong Kong and Macau. South Tyrol is its autonomy and its power-sharing institutions are guaranteed in a treaty between Austria and Italy. So there are the Good Friday Agreement is basically a treaty agreement between the British government and the Irish government. So these are all autonomy agreements that have some status above and beyond the domestic level, which makes it less easy for a central government just to tear these things up. Now, for the specific case of the Kurds in Iraq, we could certainly discuss, because clearly there aren't two countries involved here. There are different ways of approaching how you would guarantee this. But anchoring it in a sort of international law seems to me, if the rest of Iraq doesn't want to be federated, seems to me a good way of providing or guaranteeing autonomy for the Kurds. We have, in addition, the problem of the disputed territories of Iraq. So again, rule number one, if you're going to have an autonomous entity, it's probably a good idea to define the boundary first. This wasn't done, and you can see this is a real mess. This light grey area, this is what's recognized as the Kurdish area, but subject to what was supposed to be a process to resolve the status of this light grey area. And of course, you've got that sort of black stuff getting in the way of this. So you have a very mixed population and oil. So you've got mixed ethnic Arabs, Turkmens, Sunni and Shia Arabs, Kurds throughout this, and this is a real mess. Given that I have 12 minutes to talk, I'm probably not going to be able to resolve this one. But I'm happy to, I've done quite a lot of work on this particular issue, so I'll be happy to answer any questions on it.
Thank you, Dr. Anderson. We're actually quite generous. We gave you more than 12 minutes, actually. Thank you very much. Because your presentation is very interesting and very insightful, of course. That's why we just keep you talk and give more inside a story about your publications. Certainly, this is a very interesting. It's time, I believe, for you to give a comment on his recent publication. As you said that you are surrounded by crazy people surrounding you here, but I just remember that what Goethe said, the German philosopher, about genius. Genius needs boldness and craziness. That I believe that you are also genius in this respect. Well, how you connect Iraq and Åland Island.
It would be rude of me to disagree with you. So.
Well, as you heard, it is very wide range of presentations. I believe this is also part of the academic presentation. Why Island case is a good case also for the Kurds, and Dr. Anderson gave also how Iraq pictures in the future with regard to the ethnic federation and also the federal system vis-a-vis this of ethnicity in Iraq, and certainly the danger of fragmentation is there, and what lesson learned from this. It's very interesting presentation. Without further ado, I would like to give now to our last speaker, Mr. Robert Dunn. As I mentioned before, that Mr. Robert Dunn is the Chief ad interim of the Mediation Support Unit in the Policy and Mediation Division of the Department of Political Affairs of the United Nations. Mr. Dunn is a graduate of the University of Queensland in Arts and Law, and of the University of Oxford with MPhil in International Relations. Between 2005 to 2011, he was the Senior Political Advisor to the UN Special Coordinator for the Middle East Peace Process, based in Jerusalem, Ramallah, and Gaza. In addition, he was also deployed to Cairo, Egypt, to advise the UN during the political turmoil there in early 2011. He previously served as a speechwriter for the UN Secretary General Kofi Annan, and was a special assistant to the UN Special Advisor for Cyprus during 2000-2004 Cyprus peace talks and the development of the Annan Plan. So you have the floor, Mr. Dunn.
Thank you very much, Ambassador. And thank you, Ambassador, and thank you all for this extremely interesting forum that we're having this morning. I'm particularly grateful to the International Peace Institute and to Finland, both very strong partners and supporters of the UN in its mediation efforts. One of my UN colleagues, Nicholas Haysom, in the Executive Office of the Secretary General, likes to say that the role of a mediator is to help expand the imagination of the parties. And I feel that this exercise that we're doing today is a very good exercise in helping to expand our collective imaginations and to not proselytize, but at least to widen the circle of people who are aware of the issues of autonomy that we are discussing today and can think about them and how they may apply and how they may be different from other situations. The Ålands is an inspiring example of if I may say, a win-win conflict resolution model it embodies many things that the United Nations that are quite central to the United Nations: respect for sovereignty, respect for the autonomy of peoples, management of conflict in a way that that conflict, of course, never quite ends. There's always going to be issues, but that they are then resolved non-violently and politically through dialogue. And I think I would want to make a few observations about it before I go on to some lessons that we in the mediation profession might have. One is that very often autonomy and self-determination are kind of folded together as though they're the same concept, but they're not necessarily. And I think in terms of how we as mediators think about issues of autonomy, very often autonomy is a way to address a claim for separateness, for identity, for ruling our area, that at the same time does not necessarily imply a future independence. And in fact, on the contrary, it preserves the territorial integrity and sovereignty of a state. And it, in that respect, is a very important tool. I would also expand it in two or three other directions, and they're inspired a bit by the conversations that have been on this panel. One is that autonomy is a subset of a larger discussion about power sharing. You actually gave us a very good schema of power sharing and federalism in its multiple dimensions. Sometimes autonomy is the only power sharing aspect in a situation. Sometimes it is bolted into a broader federal situation. Sometimes it is symmetric, sometimes it is asymmetric. But in this sense, autonomy is an important tool of a larger toolkit when we think about power sharing. I think autonomy also is important in another way, which is that it's sometimes an important transitional tool. This actually hasn't been mentioned so much today, but obviously the Ålands is a case where autonomy is the end state. We have examples, of course, in conflict resolution efforts where autonomy has been a way station where the parties at the point of agreeing on autonomy have not been able to agree on what the end state ought to be, but they may have been able to agree on a process to decide the end state. I can think of Bougainville, I can think of South Sudan. I would also say Palestine, which I just came from, and Israel-Palestine is another example. Now, of course, the difficulties that these peace processes face is a reminder that all of these situations are different. Sometimes the interim doesn't lead to something permanent. Sometimes it does, but at least it's important that when we think about autonomy, that we think about it as a subject in its own right, as a larger part of power sharing, and also potentially as an instrument of transition. Now, when I think about the United Nations and its role in autonomy efforts, one first observation I would make is that most of the best known examples of autonomy arrangements are in fact in countries where the UN was not involved. Northern Ireland, Quebec, Scotland, Catalonia, Aceh, the Philippines and Mindanao, China and Hong Kong. There are, in fact, today when we look around, there are not that many autonomy arrangements in countries where the UN has a current political presence. I think That's possibly partly because of the issue I started with, which is that because the debate tends to sometimes focus on sovereignty and territorial integrity on the one hand, or self-determination on the other, this middle ground, this very important ground, is sometimes not sufficiently appreciated. There is often resistance from sovereign states to entertain discussion of this ground, and therefore to entertain mediation from outside on the subject. And on the other side, there is often resistance from those claiming to preserve their local identity to anything less than full self-determination. Now, there will be cases where we will not be able to necessarily overcome that, but it's important as a mediator that we are aware of these possibilities and that we help the parties expand their imagination on the subject. We are operating in many countries today where the final status issues remain undetermined. Somalia, Western Sahara, Sudan, Cyprus, Israel, Palestine, Iraq, Kosovo. And so it is important that we are apprised of these issues. I think when we look at how we play that role, I think we can divide it into two groups. One is in facilitating agreements where power sharing or autonomy provisions are a part, and the second is to help make autonomous regions viable through institutional and security and other support. Naturally, in the mediation business, we're more focused on the former, but actually, when you think about autonomy and its related federalism and transitions and all the rest of it, it actually engages itself at all ranges of the conflict cycle. So it's an important tool of prevention. Identifying cases where centre-periphery tensions may lead to conflict. I can think of Kosovo and the protection of the Serbs in Mitrovica. The status of the Serb enclaves in Kosovo remains undetermined, but having a preventive lens to look at this problem is an important tool. In peacemaking, if we look at Western Sahara or Darfur, clear examples where either autonomy is a possibility for an end state or a possibility for a transition. In peacekeeping and support for political processes, the promotion of minority protection or the assistance for self-determination in referenda, where the self-determination has then been agreed as part of if the transition from autonomy is going to a referenda on self-determination, the UN has a role there. In peace building, of course, support often for decentralisation. I see my colleague from UNDP here. Or institution building in newly established entities. This is important work that actually helps the viability of these autonomous regions. If we think then about what this means for a mediator, I think autonomy and decentralisation can answer key demands. For many non-majority groups, the priority is to have genuine self-governance over their territory, including control over a certain amount of their own financial resources. For the majority community, the priority might be to keep a certain amount of control at the centre and to maintain the unified character of the state. Decentralisation and special autonomy can fulfil both these demands by providing for self-rule within a unified state. Decentralisation and special autonomy can also establish forms of government that are in compliance with international law standards on minority protection and self-determination. But it is not a silver bullet and is not always the answer to every situation. Decentralisation and special autonomy do contain some risks in some situations. Decentralised governments, a special autonomy government is not automatically the better or more righteous level of government. For instance, decentralisation can lead to the emergence of new levels of corruption. It can empower local warlords. It can be used to establish new dominant structures and to suppress minorities at the local level, which is one reason why autonomy is not a substitute for minority rights, and where if an autonomous region is created, then a minority within that autonomous region also has to have its rights protected. Decentralisation and special autonomy can also lead to certain frustrations if powers are not matched with resources, if decentralisation and special autonomy are not well entrenched, if implementation legislation is prepared by the centre without or with minimal consultation of the concerned. In the case of special autonomy, special rights for one region might cause frustration in other regions and might trigger demands for similar rights. These are all challenges that a mediator faces. So therefore, what are the key questions a mediator should ask herself or himself? What things would the Åland example inspire a mediator to ask? What are the major reasons that decentralisation or special autonomy is advocated? And what are the major reasons voiced against it? Can decentralisation address the root causes of the conflict? What causes remain unaddressed? Is there a general willingness to introduce genuine local self-rule and share resources? Or is there a general will of all to live in a common state? Will non-majority groups be satisfied with devolved self-rule? Can decentralisation contribute to common nation and trust building? And then in the actual substance of an agreement, there are also many questions. Should there be one or several levels of decentralised government? Who has the legitimacy to decide on the decentralised units? Based on what procedures and what criteria? Will the creation of decentralised units and special autonomous regions create new minorities? If so, are there mechanisms in place, such as human rights protections by the centre and participation at the local level to protect new minorities and other groups? In the case of special autonomy, what reactions of other regions can be expected? Will they demand equal or similar rights? Should they be able to have them? If so, how? What could the procedures be to extend special autonomy to other regions? What kind of powers should decentralised and special autonomous areas have? Are sensitive areas of decision-making left to lower levels of government? Do decentralised and special autonomous units have the right to hand powers back? Or can the centre interfere in matters of devolved powers if decentralised or special autonomous units do not fulfil their tasks? What control and coordination mechanisms are left? How will issues of identity be addressed? Language, national symbols, etc. How far should decentralised and special autonomous units be able to decide on their own organisation? Do local specificities have to be taken into account? Will local institutions be able to fulfil tasks and deliver services? What kind of capacity building does this need? What is the financial potential of the units? What kind of resources do decentralised and specialised autonomous units have? What kind of infrastructure and property will they have? Are their registries up to date? Is there a system of financial equalisation in place? Are there mechanisms in place to assure dispute resolution between the units and between the centre and the units? And what are the guarantees that self-rule will not be unilaterally revoked or changed? Are decentralised and special autonomous units involved in the process of drafting major implementing legislation? What are the role of external kin states? Irredentist claims or aggressively pursued demands for autonomy are likely to inhibit the prospect of establishing genuine autonomy unless the mediator is able to develop, among the parties concerned, a consensus, including the regional players and particularly the kin states. I also want to make one final comment about the importance, for the UN at least, of partnerships with regional organisations and with non-government actors on these issues. I think precisely because the issues of sovereignty on the one hand and self-determination on the other are very sensitive, sometimes it is not the UN that will be the right player. This is clearly the case of Aceh, where President Ahtisaari was able to play a crucial role that perhaps would not have been able to be played by an international organisation. If we look at regional organisations, I can think of the Commissioner for National Minorities in the OSCE, a special tool that enables special attention to the interests and the rights of minorities, and a tool that because of its regional character is able to be more, if you like, on the spot and legitimate in the area. We mentioned, it was mentioned here by Liam, the issue of international guarantees, often a good idea. Equally, sometimes those guarantees can be regional. If I think of the case of Cyprus, which I worked on for many years, the example of how the Ålands, how separate integration, when Finland joined the European Union, special derogations and accommodations were made for Ålands was also inspired us when we were dealing with the Cyprus conflict. And it meant also that in addition to the the guarantee system that existed on Cyprus of the regional powers, a new level of reassurance for all parties was brought in by its potential integration into Europe. This at least was the theory. In practice, of course, the deal did not happen. But the tool that was in our mind was there. So these are just some general observations I would make. I'm reluctant to comment on specific cases that far more knowledgeable people than I on the panel have been speaking about, Abyei and Kurdistan. But I think as the unit in the Department of Political Affairs that is seeking to be a repository of expertise on these matters, and to ensure that UN and other mediators in the field have access to these examples, to this knowledge, and to ensure that it is applied in the right context, this kind of event is very helpful and much appreciated. And I leave it at that. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Dunn, for your very useful presentations. So a lot of questions put forward by Mr. Dunn in his presentation. I believe if all we answer these questions, I think we can make 1,000 pages of dissertation, I believe, on this very interesting topics. Of course, Mr. Dunn in his presentations encompassed many issues from the role of mediator, and to expand the imaginations of the mediators, and the role of United Nations in this respect, especially on the management of conflicts to avoid violence, and how the autonomy can be designed in the power sharing mechanism, for example, and of course he touched upon the self-determination versus the territorial integrity, which is very much important in many negotiation process. Peacemaking, peacekeeping, peace building is part of the process of this peace creation. It's a lot of things that, as you heard, questions, conditions to bring a peace on board. So I give now the floor for you to put questions to the three panelists. But since Mr. Baldo is taking his liberty to when the natures call, so please give questions first to these two panelists, to Mr. Anderson and Mr. Robert. Then I see the floor to the Honorable. You have the floor.
Thank you very much for the presentations. I have to stand up and say that in front of me, have your paper.
Have you read it?
So it exists in real.
Good.
But the question, I very much appreciated your presentation. And what I would like to ask is, no one has mentioned the Liechtenstein initiative. Liechtenstein took the initiative when they became members of the UN to elaborate a standard on autonomy. Because, as we all know, the right of self-determination is very controversial, and we know all what human rights is, what women's rights, minority rights, but we don't know what is autonomy rights. And so there was an initiative about maybe international standards, maybe an ombudsman, high commissioner, or whatever. And this ended up in an institute. But I would like to have a comment on this. How likely do you see that there could be worked out something like this, so that there would be international standards for autonomy? And as you rightly said, our autonomy is embedded. We even had the right, to file complaints in the beginning to the League of Nations or to the Permanent Court in The Hague if it was a legal question. That has been taken away, but it functions still, opposite to Gagauzia, where it's solely entrenched in the organic law. But a comment on the Liechtenstein initiative. Thank you.
Thank you. As in the first panel, there were questions on the role of women, but on the first round of this discussion, I give women first three questions from women. So you have to.
Mr. Chairman, my name is Diana Sutikno from the Indonesian Mission. I would like to first of all thank all the panelists for their very, very important presentations and insightful, as well coming from the academia as well as the UN. My question probably would be more suitable to to Mr. Dan from the UNDPA, but maybe if others can also help as well to enlighten the issue of the importance maybe at the UN level. We have the Declaration on the Protection of Indigenous Peoples. And I think I would like to also pick up from the first question from Honorable Member of Parliament of Åland Islands on the importance of maybe promoting the spatial autonomy as probably one of the most viable options to resolve conflicts. In particular, when we also in our disposal a very important declaration of indigenous peoples, that maybe there is also a possibility to, at the UN side, to promote this very important document of the UN agreed actually resulting from a very long negotiations at the UN, almost about 12 years, and then we finally agreed back in 2006 in Geneva to actually agree on this declaration. And among the important features of the declaration is the respect for sovereignty of independent state. But at the same time, of course, we've seen maybe a few attempts or maybe notions or maybe exercise from maybe some ethnic groups or maybe some examples of using this declaration as a tool for them to actually advance independence from independent, actually a sovereign nation. So I think I would like to have your comments maybe from Mr. Dan, and maybe if also other speakers could also see the importance of using this document to also help promote the special autonomy or special autonomy as one of the good or viable solution of a peaceful solution of conflict. Thank you.
There's another woman. It seems not so. Three questions first, and then I give the floor to the speakers to respond, and then if we still have time, we will continue for another round of questions.
Thank you, Ambassador Puja. Amin Chabi from the Mission of Morocco. I would like to thank the speakers for their very, very important presentations. I think that it gives a clear idea on what are the ingredients for autonomy regimes to work. I think that when we discuss the issue of autonomy in the United Nations, we tend to forget that one of the examples of autonomy that was supervised by the United Nations was in Indonesia as soon as the 70s with Irian Jaya. The resolution of this dispute stands as a clear example of an autonomy regime that was granted and that is still viable nowadays. I think also that Resolution 1541 of the General Assembly of 1960 envisages autonomy as a viable form of self-determination alongside with free association and independence. So the intersections between self-determination and the other arrangements, namely autonomy, are there, and they are a very, very fertile ground that we can tap on. Picking up from the first panel, I think that there are examples, there are not models, but it is up to each situation to fashion the autonomy regime according to the specificities of the conflict. It is very, very important in that regard, and this is my question, that we built on the autonomy arrangements that are existing in the world, so that inside the United Nations and specifically inside the mediation unit, we can have a repository of best practices and lessons learned of autonomy, as we see that autonomy is flexible and nimble in nature, and it is a modern form of self-determination. So my question to the panelists and particularly to Professor Anderson and Mr. Dunn from the mediation unit is, how can we collectively as member states, but also as members of academia, make sure that autonomy is known worldwide as a viable, a modern form of self-determination. And this joins in a certain way the question that was asked earlier by Elizabeth on the Liechtenstein initiative that was promoted by the Principality of Liechtenstein that has tried both in academic circles in the Princeton Center, but also inside the United Nations, to promote autonomy as a viable way for conflict management and resolution. Thank you.
So there are three questions from the floor, basically addressed to Dr. Anderson and Mr. Dunn, but it should not prevent you, Dr. Baldo, from giving your comment also, especially with regard to the question on indigenous peoples and also about the autonomy versus self-determination. First, Dr. Liam Anderson.
I would tend to agree with the gentleman from Morocco here that a lot these autonomous areas vary so widely in terms of just the scale and their viability, that to set standards for autonomy, I mean, if you mean by standards that there's certain minimum things that should be granted to every autonomous territory. Because, for example, the Kurds can quite happily manage their own oil resources. They have, in many ways, the expertise to do that. They have pretty good armed forces, so they can police themselves, and that's what they intend to do. Gagauzia is very, very small. It has virtually no resources. Those sorts of powers given to Gagauzia wouldn't be useful for Gagauzia to have. So I think in terms of standards of competences, let's say, globally, but I think a mechanism for recognition within the international community of autonomy would seem to me it's kind of a costless venture as well. I mean, maybe it comes through UN Security Council resolutions or some more organized mechanism for recognizing the existence of autonomous entities and embedding them in the recognition of the international community. I think that would certainly be a good idea. The other thing to think about, of course, is that I think that there's a problem with, and you encounter this in Ukraine and Crimea, that the Ukrainian Supreme Court, when asked to rule on certain elements of Crimea's autonomy, almost always, I mean, the one decision it's made that's gone in favor of Crimea is to recognize that Crimea is autonomous. But in terms of the powers that are supposedly granted to Crimea as an autonomous region, every decision the Ukrainian Supreme Court's had to make has taken power away from Crimea. And I think that's a real issue for an autonomous unit in an otherwise unitary state. So some sort of legal mechanism as well for involving the international community in interpreting the terms of autonomy agreements would probably be useful.
Thank you. Sajid?
Well, thank you. There were sort of three questions addressed to me, but I feel that actually there are different aspects of the same question, which is an interest, I think, in perhaps heightening either, in the case of the Declaration of Indigenous Peoples, awareness of how this instrument can be used. In the case of Elizabeth's question, the question of whether there should be more of a promotion of some sort of a normative position on autonomy within the UN by its members, and then, of course, also the very important point that was made that, and I don't wish to be misunderstood in what I said earlier, that autonomy can be a modern form of achievement or of recognition of self-determination. I mean, I don't. I'm instinctively a mediator, and therefore I think some of those questions belong very much within the membership of the UN, and I think that the UN mediators per se often have to address the world as it is. But the importance of what they do is that they are aware of these different normative instruments out there and how they can be used in particular cases. Whether the UN membership should or should not take some further step regarding a right of autonomy or etc. is ultimately a matter for them, and I would say that as a Secretariat official. But I do think it's very important, and I agree with the gentleman's question, I think it's very important that that within the Secretariat, and this is what our unit tries to do, that there is a repository of knowledge and expertise on these issues that is able to be utilised when conflicts arise, and we're able to work with parties to help them. I actually want to tell you a story about that. In Gaza a couple of years ago, I was talking with the national, one of the Palestinians who was going back and forth between the West Bank and Gaza, trying to fashion some kind of reconciliation out of the division. And I said to that person, given the geographical differences now and the other differences, if I may put it that way, between Gaza and the West Bank, you may wish to start thinking about different ways in which you may think of resigning and reunifying. There has always been a very unitary kind of political culture, if you like, in that area. And the reaction was immediately, no way, we cannot do that, because anything that smacks of power sharing is the beginning of the road to a breakdown. It's the beginning of a road to secession or the end of a common national identity. And I think that's where expanding the imagination of parties is important. How to help them see this as a tool in that middle area, and most conflict resolution ends up being in that middle area. It doesn't end up being an absolute victory for one party or the other. And so this would be my common answer to all the questions that were raised to me.
Mr. Baldo? You have no comment. Well, it is actually very interesting when, Sudan, you talk about the interpretation of this power sharing towards independence, because it is also we experience in Aceh when we have this memorandum of understanding, and before that the citizen of facilities agreement, and also the I forgot the first one. This agreement, it is always interpreted by the movement, the Free Aceh movement, and how they told on the other side differently the people, the Acehni people, that what they agreed actually is one step towards independence. They always manipulate the people by giving this information. This is very, very delicate, of course. It's very dangerous. But if you allow me, we still have a couple of minutes. I saw two hands raised. Give you, gentlemen, and then second question.
Okay, thank you. My name is Jongi Klaas from the South African Mission. I've got a question directed to Dr. Baldo. My question is that in the light of the challenges you noted on the Abyei region, what do you think would be the best possible long-lasting solution to that region? I'm asking these questions having three options in my mind, which are possible scenarios. One, probably, is it better to reinforce the government of South Sudan with enough military ammunition in order to defend itself from Khartoum and bring stability in South Sudan? Option two, probably to deploy the troops under the AU and UN command in Abyei on condition that both South and North Sudan government will stay out of the conflict. Three, to compel Khartoum to adhere to the comprehensive peace agreement. Thank you.
The second gentleman.
Hello, my name is Jan from the Mission of Liechtenstein, and I don't have a question related to the Liechtenstein initiative, but similar to my colleague, Mr. Baldo, could you maybe explain, you said that there are different groups moving in and out of Abyei, so they are not always there for the whole time. is soft borders a concept that could work in this region, and how can different groups from different countries by now actually share this region for the best of their benefits? So could this be another option as a solution? Thanks.
So you have the privilege to answer the responded to questions.
Yes, I would just like to distance myself from the three options the colleague from the South African mission offered. Your countryman, President Mbeki, of course, is the main mediator around post-independence issues between North and South. And he's supported by the African Union and the United Nations, in terms of technical expertise and so on. But he's a mediator trusted by both parties and have the leverage with regional powers such as, particularly Ethiopia, which is a key player in this game and so on. And the solutions that President Mbeki is proposing are precisely towards, for example, the option of soft borders, that the populations in South Kordofan, the Miseria, and the Dinka don't have to suffer from the consequences of the independence of South Sudan. There is a lot of trade, border trade between these two regions, and since the independence of the South, Khartoum has closed the border for the movement of goods and so on. This is very punishing for the economies, local economies in the South, and for the interests of populations, both in the South, but also those populations in the North whose livelihood depend on this kind of interaction. The interesting situation about the situation in Abyei, this is not an intercommunal, conflict. It's not Miseria on Dinka. It is a conflict between the armies of the SPLM and the government of Sudan. And both have used ethnicity to recruit fighters. And particularly on government of side, there are militias who are, in the first cycle of the war, 82 to 2005, they were using horses to raid Dinka villages for collective punishment of the Dinka as people. This time around, they're using motorcycles. There is a level of technical, quote unquote, in the kind of warfare that's occurring. But again, I would like to argue that this is not the population, and the population feels betrayed, by their own leaders, that Khartoum is not representing our interests. The Miseria, I would say, if there are positions for the local administration in Abyei, they bring their own appointees from the party and not from the local chieftains and so on. And the local Dinka would tell you, if we are allowed and given room to discuss with our counterparts in the Miseria, we will find solutions. They have always found solutions. So you need mediators who could bring in this local knowledge and whatever, esteem and some interdependence that the local communities still have, and their abilities to overcome conflict and to contain it. And to keep the governments out, not by force, but by really showing that this makes sense. This is the only way that lasting solutions could be found. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Bardo. Excellencies, distinguished participants, ladies and gentlemen, we have heard a very insightful and comprehensive round of presentations from our esteemed panelists, and engaged in a very productive discussions. I'm not going to make a summary of the whole exercise for the second panel. Rather, I would like to reiterate the centrality of peaceful settlement of conflicts through mediation, and in this regard, through exploring the vital significance of the use of special autonomy. I thank the three panelists, Dr. Bardo, Dr. Anderson, and Mr. Dunn, for their very illuminating presentations, and all participants for your active and constructive contributions to our discussion. For the second panel, let's give a big applause to the three panelists for their excellent presentation. Thank you very much. Don't leave the room because we still have a closing session before we dismiss. Thank you so much. I give the floor now to the organizer to make another arrangement. Thank you so much.
Excellencies, distinguished panelists, dear colleagues, ladies and gentlemen, as our policy discussion comes to close, let me, on behalf of the Indonesian and the Finnish permanent missions, reiterate our sincere thanks to the distinguished representatives and participants for their active participation and views. Let me also thank our distinguished panelists for their very useful presentations. The discussion this morning has highlighted the centrality of peaceful resolutions to the conflict, including through mediations. In that context, the use of special autonomy regime for the maintenance of peace and security, as well as promotion of development at national and regional levels, has emerged of vital significance. We therefore thank all speakers for having raised and stressed the benefits of using spatial autonomy approach and as an important means for peaceful resolution of conflict. The learning presented by our panelists today on how to advance and attain peace, in particular using the spatial autonomy scheme, is a very important lesson that merit greater considerations. While the nature of each conflict is unique, the experience in Åland Islands, and particularly the Aceh province of Indonesia, have clearly shown various indispensable elements for success in conflict resolutions. These workable elements include, among others, a strong commitment to peace from national leaderships, the need for comprehensive peace deals encompassing all aspects that prevents renewal of conflict, an approach that promotes overall political settlement of dispute, as well as existence of democratic political environment as crucial enabler for a peace process. Furthermore, it is to be stressed that in order for nurturing of mutual confidence among parties to disputes, there should be a strong appetite in them for a negotiated resolutions. While this appetite may not be apparent in the beginning, it could be created and developed through persistent political and diplomatic effort. Thus, as we heard, it is critically that there be impartial and experienced mediators with high level of international contact and strong commitment to be fair and tough throughout the process of negotiations. Building of intra-party cohesion and understanding on ultimately of all elements of a conflict is undoubtedly vital. But it is not easy, and the achievement of intra-party cohesion requires a careful consolidations of gains and allowing negotiators to function as to sole legitimate voices and representative of respective parties. Such consolidations aims to ensure that internal divisions within conflicting parties do not damage the hard-won agreements in negotiations at the latter stage. Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, each society has different ways of achieving equity and justice and reconciling its differences. And as mentioned, every conflict is different. But as we have heard, there are some fundamentals that usually underpin peaceful and sustainable resolution of conflict. It is my hope that our exchange here would lend a useful contribution to the work aimed at ongoing settlement to conflict, particularly where concepts of spatial autonomy scheme could be explored. In this regard, the two cases of Abyei and Kurdistan region of Iraq presented today show opportunities where the use of spatial autonomy might yield positive results. In joining my Finnish colleagues in thanking all of you for making today's sessions productive through your very thought-provoking, candid, and interactive participation. In ending, we reiterate our hope that pertinent points from these sessions would be considered by the UN system as well as other stakeholders for enabling workable and lasting solutions for festering global conflicts of today. I thank you.
Thank you, Ambassador Khan. It really remains to me simply to thank you all. I think it's been a very interesting morning, if you agree with me. I learned a lot. I think we learned that there are no models, but a lot of examples. I think that we learned that the uniqueness of solutions has to be kept in mind. But at the same time, examples and history can help us to expand our imagination. So I think this occasion of the 90th anniversary of the Åland, or the solution of the Åland crisis, has been a great opportunity for us to expand our knowledge and imagination. Thank you very much to all the speakers. Thank you to the government of Åland representative. Thank you very much to the mission of Indonesia. Thank you very much to the mission of Finland for hosting this event with us, and to all of you for participating. And I hope to see you very soon at IPI again. Thank you.